Welcome to No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello Jr.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Parham.
People that are watching us live, you may notice there is a third face in our little box, and we will definitely get to him later. He will be our reaction shots, I guess, our silent peanut gallery, all the way until we get to the no question segment. And actually, this episode is almost, it feels a little bit like a gigantic no question episode because we got quite a lot of questions, one of which really required an in-depth topic. That would be a question from listener Jared, I'm going to say Lytle. He sent us an email that inspired this topic. It says, I'm preparing to get out of the Army, and so I'm very much looking forward to getting back into tabletop gaming with my longtime gaming group. It's been several years since I've been able to game with them, and I'm a little overwhelmed by the range of content, both official and supplemental. We've historically been a D&D group, but made the obvious transition to Pathfinder, and Pathfinder is the game the group continued to play in his absence. With such a break in his gaming continuity, he'd hoped to get a better handle on the current state of the game. And because he enjoys our podcasts, but often lacks a certain amount of context, he was wondering if we could do an entire Pathfinder Primer episode. So, Parham, what was your reaction when we got Jared Lytle's email?
Well, my first reaction was, hey, wait, didn't we do a Primer episode?
We did. A long time ago, 2 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, we did an episode 0. And the idea was that new listeners would always refer to episode 0 as their first episode, regardless of what the current episode was. Thing was, we kind of failed to constantly remind people that if you're new to the podcast, check out episode 0. And episode 0 doesn't have a prominent place on our website. And so, episode 0 is not serving its intended purpose. And that's our fault. Yeah, and then number 2, the game has changed quite a lot in those 2 or 3 years since we recorded that episode. So even if you're a new listener and somehow you know to check out episode 0 and you find it and listen to it, that's not completely up to date anymore. So Parham, we've been doing these special episodes every so often, these guest list special features, and Pathfinder Primer seemed like a great example of something that we can handle in a special feature.
Yeah, exactly. This episode actually really does need to happen because, as you said, the game has changed a whole lot, and there's never really been a more timely time to discuss it with the impending 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons on the horizon. A lot of shakeups has happened with Pathfinder Society. Entire product lines have branched off with the card game. The online game is somewhere coming down the pike. So there's a lot that was different and added and honestly unrecognizable about Pathfinder if you were just going off of our perspective on it 3 years ago.
And speaking of our perspective, you and I stay on top of as much Pathfinder as we possibly can, but it's not really fair to assume our listeners are going to be able to follow everything that we're talking about. So if we just suddenly mention something about Dreamscard, we know what we're talking about. Many of our listeners will know what we're talking about, but not everyone will know we're talking about a third-party publisher who specializes in psionics mechanics. We just say Dreamscard.
It's just 84 episodes that average 2.5 hours each. I mean, they can catch up, right?
At some point they will catch up, but by then there will be more episodes.
Oh, yes. But yeah, you're right.
So if this is your first episode, welcome, new listener. Or if you've been listening for a while and you're just scratching your head trying to figure out what this Pathfinder thing is, hopefully we can help you out, and you can follow along. If you happen to have a computer handy, which at this point, doesn't everyone always have a computer handy?
Well, sometimes the computer's a cell phone, but...
I guess I should also point out that I am recovering from an illness, and this is probably the most I've talked since Friday when I had to take a day off for a really nasty cold. So I'm going to try and hit the cough button as quickly as I can when I feel one coming on. But, Parham, if you ever see me just starting to gag, yeah, that's your cue to take over.
Someone needs a better force save.
Yeah.
All right. Well, besides talking about Ryan putting con as his dump stat, Pathfinder itself, the name itself, means a lot of different things depending on the context. Originally, Pathfinder simply meant this magazine/adventure path publication that Paizo Publishing was putting out that was for 3.5 edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and then things changed.
Indeed. So this book was some combination of Dragon and Dungeon magazine, but had the quality of a print book, and it's come to be known as the Adventure Path line. It had to happen because Paizo was the publisher of Dungeon and Dragon magazine. They were a second party publisher. They were a licensed publisher for Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons property. Wizards of the Coast decided to publish Dungeons and Dragons themselves, which Paizo then accepted. They created the Adventure Path line, then just known as Pathfinder, and the idea was that this is the direction that Paizo would go in now. What they didn't realize is the main reason that Wizards of the Coast was taking back Dungeons and Dragons is because they were discontinuing the 3rd edition, or 3.5 technically edition of Dungeons and Dragons at the time, and replacing it with 4th edition, which, unlike 3rd edition, the exact third-party publisher, the openness of the third-party publisher license was really in question early on, and almost right up to the publication of 5th edition. So Paizo, as this third-party publisher who had a staff of employees and they had all kinds of people to pay, didn't know what their future was. So they had to make a decision. That decision was to turn 3.5, which, as I just mentioned, was a completely open game. They had full legal rights to use any or almost all of the rules for that system. They decided to turn that into its own fantasy role-playing game, also called Pathfinder.
Yep. And considering that there was also a campaign setting called Pathfinder, things got a little confusing. But nowadays when people talk about Pathfinder, they're almost always talking about the Pathfinder role-playing game system and not the adventure path or the campaign setting or now the card game or the online game that it's since branched off into.
There's a good chance we're talking about the sports utility wagon that still owns Pathfinder.com, which is why, if you're following at home, we recommend you click on Paizo.com/Pathfinder.
Yes. Now, Pathfinder itself is divided into 2 major divisions. The Pathfinder role-playing game lines, which are mostly setting agnostics and just pure rule systems, and these are mostly published as hardbound rule books, of which there are 13. And then the second half of it is everything related to the Pathfinder campaign setting and the adventures that take place in the Pathfinder campaign setting.
Yes, and so when we talk about Pathfinder campaign setting, we could be talking about the setting itself or the line of books called the Pathfinder campaign setting. There could be some confusion there, but ultimately there is a wide variety of books and titles that fall under the campaign setting banner. And there's really just the one line that falls under the Pathfinder role-playing game. So other than the game mastery the game mastery screen, everything in the Pathfinder role-playing game line is a book.
Yep. The pawns also are technically in the role-playing game line, but they have their own subscription.
Okay. All right, I'll call the pawns their own thing. And actually, there's the beginner box.
Yep, and the beginner box. Beginner box!
Now, go ahead.
Okay. So for those of you who getting started in the Pathfinder role-playing game, there are really 2 books that get you started there. There's the core rulebook, the Pathfinder role-playing game core rulebook. This is the 575-page monster of a hardback that you can get for the game that teaches you everything you need to know about how to play and run the game and its basics. And then there is the first bestiary, which is all the default monsters that the core rulebook assumes you have access to.
Beyond that, they started releasing original rules because those 2 rule books are almost entirely made up of revised rules of the 3.5 rule system, 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons. Starting with the Advanced Player's Guide, which was the 3rd book to come out after the core rule book. There was also the Game Mastery Guide, which we'll get into in a bit. But the Advanced Player's Guide was pretty much the launch title for exclusive Pathfinder content. There were 6 new classes that many people consider are as core as the core rulebook classes. So you've got the Alchemist, the Cavalier, I'm trying to do this in alphabetical order. All right, Alchemist, Cavalier, Witch, Summoner, Inquisitor. Who am I missing?
Oracle.
And the Oracle. Thank you, Param.
I was wondering which one you'd miss. We always miss one.
Along with the 11 classes from the core rulebook, which were ported over from 3.5, those are the core 17 base classes for the Pathfinder role-playing game.
And this is also when we started to see Pathfinder role-playing game really embrace the core concepts of itself and how it wanted to be different from 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons. And it's important to go into those stated differences because Pathfinder is not just the 3.5 copy-pasted, though some people will disagree with me on that. But they also had several philosophy changes and overall design changes. The first of which was that they wanted to unify and simplify as many of the rules as possible, which is the reason that hit dice and base attack bonus were tied together for the classes. So you had things like wizards suddenly having d6 hit dice, and rogues getting a d8, and everybody but barbarian that is fightery gets their d10, and then of course barbarian gets its special snowflake d12 hit points, which it loves very much. And you also had the philosophy that was very different from the core game, that every class should be interesting for 20 levels. You should be able to take any class in the game all the way up to 20 levels and have reasons to do this. So you had a lot of things like the sorcerer had bloodlines to make it more interesting as it leveled up. Clerics' domains were heavily altered and enhanced. Rogues got a whole bunch of talents. Barbarians got a whole bunch of rage. Bards got overhauled. The fighter got a lot of special abilities to make it more interesting all the way it leveled up. And almost every class got what was called a capstone ability at level 20, where they became insane. They're like the Slayer Arrow, Immortality, some crazy benefit for hitting level 20. These are called the capstone abilities, and every Pathfinder class benefits from having a capstone ability. And the final thing they changed was they wanted to unify all the combat rules to make them as simple as possible, and we had what was called the combat maneuver rules, which are wholly unique to Pathfinder. And what they did is all those things you used to do, like trip and disarm and grapple, which all had vastly different rule systems that confused GMs all to heck and required me to carry around a special reference sheet to every game I went to just so I would know exactly what to do. When they came up, that was there, and it helped make things a lot easier. Basically, how combat maneuver works is you have two new stats on your characters that you wouldn't have had when you have a 3.5 character, called combat maneuver bonus and combat maneuver defense. Combat maneuver defense is like an AC. Combat maneuver bonus is like an attack roll. And whenever you want to do something, you roll, and if it beats their defense, you do it. And that made the game a lot simpler. And then there was all kinds of other balance changes, like they tried to get rid of as many save or die effects as there were in the game and kind of narrow those way down, and do a lot to balance out the classes so that casters weren't as ridiculously overpowered as they were, though some still argue there's still some work to be done there. And melee classes and other classes had interesting options that they could also choose from.
The other book that I mentioned came out in that second year is the Game Mastery Guide. So the Game Mastery Guide often gets glossed over because usually when you're running campaigns or when you're running a Pathfinder Society scenario or really any of the pre-printed adventures, it doesn't reference the Game Mastery Guide. It's a good source of some handy tables and a lot of great advice, but mechanically the only important things are haunts, which have been published elsewhere, chase rules, which were published elsewhere, and the back has a nice glossary of NPCs that has become a little bit more popular since then. There's other things. The Madness rules came up a little bit in Carrion Crown, the adventure path that my group is running through right now. But for the most part, the Game Mastery Guide is accepted as that was a logical follow-up to the core rulebook and the bestiary. But it wasn't the jazzy, it wasn't the really like neon follow-up that the Advanced Player's Guide was.
Yeah, and it's a lot of what it did provide has become less and less useful as more and more books have been released that sort of take its territory and enhance it, such as the NPC Codex has come out, which is nothing but a giant book full of leveled up NPCs inspired by the Game Mastery Guide section, so now you don't need that anymore. As well as the Ultimate Campaign, a lot of the special rules and that it had were adopted into Ultimate Campaign, a hardcover that is all about optional rules for everything you can do in the game that doesn't involve hitting things with shiny, pointy objects.
The end of the second year introduced the Bestiary 2, and this set the pattern that around November you can expect some kind of adversary book. So Bestiary 2, similar to the Game Mastery Guide, was kind of this is what we expected to be the next Bestiary. It covers a lot of the extraplanar stuff and any of the majority of the core monsters that were in the Monster Manual 1 in 3rd edition that didn't make it into the Bestiary 1 in Pathfinder. They showed up in the Bestiary 2.
Yep. And the bestiary tradition has continued. Each year, Pathfinder releases a bestiary-ish book, and more monsters is always a good thing at my table.
The following year, year 3 of the Pathfinder role-playing game, we started to see a more specialized approach to each release. So the 2 books that came out that year, or the 2 non-bestiary books that came out that year, are Ultimate Magic and Ultimate Combat. And each of them, they're considered companion books, and they each covered one major aspect of the game. Ultimate Magic obviously focuses on magic. It introduced Words of Power, which is it's an alternate casting system where instead of memorizing spell, you're memorizing spell ingredients. I don't want to say spell components because that already means something else.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're combining them to create effects, sometimes on the fly, sometimes at the beginning of the day. Again, it's very similar to Magic. It's just an alternate system. It's another way of doing it. It also introduced to the game the Magus, which was a new base class that was based on the combination of fighting and casting. And it's been a pretty popular class, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but it is one of the more complicated classes in the game, and the first hint of what will eventually be known as a hybrid class.
Yep. And it's also worth noting that Words of Power were introduced in that book and then promptly forgotten.
It's true. For the most part, Paizo was a lot better at introducing a concept and then supporting it. Words of Power is not one of those things that saw a lot of support.
Yep. After Ultimate Magic, of course, Ultimate Combat came out, and it introduced the Gunslinger, the Cavalier, and the Ninja classes, and
the Samurai.
Sorry, the Samurai and the Ninja classes, sorry. The Samurai, though, was a special overhauled version of the Cavalier, and the Ninja is a special overhauled version of the Rogue. And it's worth noting that at this time, the Jade Regent AP was coming out, so they needed a lot of Oriental, Asian flavor to the game and rules to support classes like that. So this book sort of also filled in that gap, as well as the Gunslinger, which was at the time probably the most controversial class ever introduced to Pathfinder, because with it came firearm rules. The default for Pathfinder is really primitive musket-type firearms, but the book also contains rules for all kinds of technology settings should you want to use them in your game. It also had the vehicle rules, all kinds of various combat rules, including the duel system, as well as the performance combat system, and more feats than you could ever want. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of feats. Also, one of the things we didn't touch on that is very important with Pathfinder is the concept of archetypes, which were introduced in the Advanced Player's Guide and really fleshed out in these 2 books. And the basics is, Pathfinder doesn't really do a lot with prestige classes. 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons loved prestige classes. Every book that was released for it was just filled with prestige classes, which are classes that you can only take once you meet certain prerequisites and usually require you to be somewhere between levels 5, 7, or 9, 7 being the most common, to get into. And they provide lots of bonuses. But with Pathfinder, they do have some prestige classes. They're usually much rarer and much more tied to the campaign setting. The default ones from the Game Master Guide of 3.5 are reprinted, except for Archmage and Hierophant. But the rest of them are deeply tied to the campaign setting. The archetypes, though, are basically like the old 2nd edition class kits. For your classes, where basically you change the class from level 1 to 20. takes abilities of the class and substitutes them with abilities that fit a certain theme. For instance, you had the Swashbuckler Rogue as an archetype that you could take. You had the Staff Magus, which were Maguses that loved fighting with staffs and doing cool things like that, and I'm sure Ryan will talk about that in an upcoming No Question that ties in with the Magus. You had the different types of the Gunslinger inspired lots of classes to get their own Gunslinger archetype, which allowed you to have, for instance, the Holy Gun, which let you be a paladin that had guns, or the Arcane Sniper, which was a wizard that had guns. And that one, oh gosh, you had to sacrifice a lot to get into that one. And ever since then, archetypes keep popping up in books where they're appropriate from that point forward.
That year we had the Bestiary 3, which I still believe is the best Bestiary after Bestiary 1. Bestiary 3 introduced a lot of creatures from myth and legend from around the real world. And so it had a very, very interesting flavor, but everything still felt familiar. But at the same time, Paizo, which happens to have a lot of really smart people who really like monsters and legends and cryptozoology, they really found a lot of more obscure or just fun monsters that haven't really gotten the fantasy treatment, because typically Dungeons & Dragons was a European-inspired setting with Eastern influences, but there was a lot of the world that was getting neglected. And Bestiary 3 really looked at all of those other monsters that just did not get their fair share of the limelight and put the spotlight on them. Next up, continuing the closer look at different aspects of the game, we got the Advanced Race Guide, Ultimate Equipment. The Advanced Race Guide featured the core races, gave each of them race-specific archetypes, gave them race-specific options, and then started looking at races that did not usually get treated as player options, and started considering, well, what if these were player options? What kind of feats would you need to fully support things like an Aasimar, a Goblin, a Kobold, a Sylph? And then there were really obscure monsters that it's like, well, okay, you're going to have to hit the crazy switch to fit these into your campaign, but if you're the kind of group that likes hitting the crazy switch away. And finally, if the crazy switch was not enough for you, the absolutely cuckoo switch you can hit, which was the race builder rules. So at the back of the Advanced Race Guide, there was rules for designing your own races, and these were races that you can integrate fully into a campaign, or you could just stand as a single example of this one weird race that no one knows where it came from.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things with the race builder rules is they showed how an insight as to how they designed their own races, and they also did a breakout of, in the race builder rules, these are what the core races would be, and we also found out what we already knew, that some races really were stronger than others by default, but not cripplingly.
Hey, you know what? If someone just wants to play an elf, it doesn't matter if the elf is the least balanced class or race in the game. If that's the race they want to play, then more power to them.
Well, literally. All right. Then we had, moving on from the Advanced Race Guide, which mostly stood on its own. We haven't seen a lot of its influences later on, because this is where we start seeing that Paizo wants to make definitive books. They don't want to do another race book, so they did the biggest race book. Then they did the biggest equipment book, which ended up not being the end of Magic Items, because you're crazy, right? But Ultimate Equipment came out, which is meant to basically replace the equipment chapter in the core rulebook and the Magic Item chapter in the core rulebook with its own giant bookiness of items, and the largest table, I think, in the game, set of tables to randomly generate treasure in it. It collected a lot of the magic items that have been printed out, and not all of them. A lot of the campaign-specific items, obviously, were not reprinted in this, but a vast majority of the magic items available in the Pathfinder books up until this point were reprinted here, along with a whole slew of new ones, and some fun rules for magic items that they added in.
Yeah, for the most part, though, Ultimate Equipment is just a catalog. Don't pick this up expecting a nice, fun read. It's probably the driest book that Paizo has ever released, but at the same time, it's a book that absolutely every character can make use of, and every character that I know does make some use of Ultimate Equipment.
Yeah, it is a really good book to have on hand, period. Once you get your basics filled out, this is a good buy for your group as a general rule.
NPC Codex was the adversary book of the year, and that's why I'm not referring to it as just a monster book or a bestiary at the end of every year, because the NPC Codex was there were no monsters in it. It was all core classes made with core races from level 1 to 20, and it was just samples NPCs that could be used in your home game either as adversaries, or if a fight suddenly breaks out and one of your players says, aren't there guards nearby? You could be like, yes, there are guards nearby, and you can just grab it, find the most appropriate guard for whatever region you're in, and just use those stats however you need them. It's become a great tool for just for giving rules to NPCs in published material without having to fill all the published adventures with stat blocks. It's easy to reference just a single page, you flip to it, and you find exactly what you need in the unlikely event that this NPC needs to be statted out. It also includes a lot of stuff related to the prestige classes from the core rulebook, as well as the NPC classes from the core rulebook, and finally all of the iconic characters. Now, we haven't really touched on this, but every single class has excuse me. I'm not doing well with the cough button. I'm sorry, guys. Every single class in the game has an iconic character tied to it. So this means that in almost all of the art, whenever there's action involving what would be done by a player character, that art, it's one of the characters that represents one of the classes is depicted in that art. And so you've got Kira or Kyra, depending on how you pronounce it, the cleric, Ezrin the iconic wizard, Mauricio the iconic rogue, Valeros the iconic fighter. These are characters that, yes, are just the picture that accompanies that class. But if you go to the Paizo website, or if you read the Pathfinder comic, or various other sources, you'll actually find out that these are fully fleshed out characters, that a lot of thought went into them, and you kind of enjoy seeing them and seeing how their character is portrayed in the various pieces of art that you'll see them in. So the iconics from the core rulebook are all statted out at 3 different levels in the NPC Codex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other important thing about these stats is, and they were since redone a little bit, but these were Pathfinder Society legal for pre-generated character choices, which up until this point was very limited at the time. And we'll go into the Pathfinder Society organized play program in a little while, but all of these iconics are some of the pre-gens that you're allowed to use when you don't have a character or need a character of a specific type for the organized play and you don't have one ready.
Going into year 5, we got the first new GM-specific book, unless you consider the adversary books GM-specific. That would be Ultimate Campaign. Now, Param, you were talking about this earlier, but it's essentially a collection of subsystems and advice that will help any GM create a campaign world, create a campaign setting, or run an adventure that could be set in Galarian, but could follow a specific set of rules, such as using downtime, which is what the characters are doing between adventures, or the kingdom-building rules adapted from the Kingmaker campaign setting.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
and it also includes,
Path.
Yeah, and it also includes the mass combat rules and other fun things for when that comes up. This is not a book you usually go in needing right away. This is more of an advanced level book for a game master to use, but it does help flesh out a lot of the aspects of the game that have traditionally gone under focus, such as what do you do when you want to make a shop, or what do you do when you want, while the wizard's crafting his magic items, what can the fighter do to help out the party during that same downtime without, the GM having to actually write an adventure up for that period of time.
Speaking of advanced books, the next book that came out for the Pathfinder role-playing game line was Mythic Adventures. This took the idea of the hero in just a regular fantasy setting, said that this is not heroic enough. This is too much Batman, not enough Superman, and created an overlay system where you could continue to level as a regular, traditional Pathfinder character, but also gain these additional abilities that were a little broader and were intentionally game breaking. Now, Param, you've got more specific experience with Mythic Adventures.
Yeah, when the Mythic Adventures came out, it was also launched alongside one of the adventure paths, Wrath of the Righteous, which is a pre-written campaign that takes full advantage of the Mythic rules. And the basics of Mythic is that you're still within the same power range of other characters of your level. You're just a little bit stronger, and the way you're stronger is you get to break the rules. I mean, you do have a few base statistics that are bigger, but you get to do things like act twice in initiative, automatically confirm critical hits, never miss on a 1, take more turns than take more attacks, order other players to take more attacks. You can make your spells instantly affect things they couldn't normally affect. You can make sleep hit whole towns at a time instead of just an area. It just basically takes the rules and then breaks them instead of adding a whole new set of stats on top of your stats.
And then year 5 ended with Bestiary 4, which, much like, actually was the theme of this year, which I may not have realized at the time, was just higher power, greater threats, advanced. So you got Cthulhu, you got mythic monsters, you've just got a larger variety of really high power, just terrible creatures in the Bestiary 4. And that makes it a very fun Bestiary. A lot of this stuff is very well written, and it's fun to read over. A monster that can absolutely decimate the average party. It's just not the Bestiary most beginning players are going to need.
Right. Save this one for later. It does have some lower level stuff, but mostly this bestiary leans in the high level, and that's to counteract the fact that the other bestiaries lean towards the under 10 level for their monsters. And the high level Pathfinder or in 3.5 play before that ran into the problem where once you passed a certain level, you just kept seeing the same few things over and over again from campaign to campaign because there was very few high level threats available. And then Mythic made it worse because low-level characters could conceivably face these high-level threats by taking advantage of Mythic rules. So you needed a high-level monsters, and this bestiary really fit the bill.
Now, we know what the 3 hardcover books that are coming out for the Pathfinder role-playing game line for this year are. The first one was supposed to be the Pathfinder role-playing game strategy guide, which was a complete flip of what we got last year. This was supposed to be the transitional book for people that start with the beginner box and are going to the core rulebook, and also transition from the core rulebook to the advanced player's guide. This got delayed for whatever reason until October, so we won't be getting our first hardcover book for the Pathfinder role-playing game line until August, which is the Gen Con release of the Advanced Class Guide. So just like a lot of the products we've seen that start honing in on a single topic, this one's topic is classes, introducing 10 new classes, which were being developed as the hybrid classes, but Jason Bulman recently announced that the concept of hybrid classes, it'll now just be a conceptual thing, that these thematically are 2 classes smushed together, mechanically any of the limitations a hybrid class had are gone. So the Advanced Class Guide introduces 10 new base classes, which I don't have listed in front of me, and I don't think I could do off the top of my head. But all of them combine 2 different base classes from the core rulebook, or the Advanced Player's Guide, or the Ultimate books.
And in some cases, 3.
What?
With Shaman.
Does it?
Yeah, it's Druid, Witch. Oh god, I forget all 3 of them. It's 3 different classes. It's like Witch, Sorcerer, no, Witch, Oracle, Druid. It originally was just 2, and then they added Druid because that spell list was better.
Oh, okay. In any case, it will also have many options for every character of any class, just at a very class level. You can expect a lot of archetypes in there, and just, we don't know. It's still a few months away, but Jason Bulman has promised that we'll start previewing both the Iconics and some more of the mechanics that made it past the playtest phase,
Mhm.
which we haven't even brought up. But if you are interested in the development of the future products for the Pathfinder role-playing game, either just to see if it has a place in your campaign or if you as a player want to play a character of that type, every time a major core rulebook or major hardcover book for the role-playing game comes out, they have a play test that is free to participate in. There is some expectation that you will provide feedback, but no actual contract forcing you to do so. And it's a great preview of upcoming products, the direction of the line, and things like we know the basic framework of all 10 classes that are going in the advanced class guide, but there's still going to be a whole bunch of new and exciting things that we have never seen and we can look forward to.
And the final rulebook of the year was just announced, and it is called the Monster Codex, which is a sort of weird mix between a bestiary and the NPC Codex. So the basic theme of it is taking some of the popular monster races and monster types and showing them leveled up and how they work together, and and giving them class levels and all kinds of other things about running these monsters as NPCs almost.
Yeah, there's a type of monster called a zero hit dice monster, which is a very crunchy term, but essentially it's that this monster is not just that monster. So you don't just meet an orc. You'll meet an orc warrior, you'll meet maybe an orc cleric, in the rare chance you'll meet an orc wizard. The idea is that unlike, say, a stone golem, which you encounter, and that's the basic stone golem, and most stone golems you encounter will be exactly the same, an orc can be built from the ground up. It's built more like a regular PC is built. And so this is a whole book just detailing entire clans of orcs, kobolds, goblins, lizard folk, rat folk, and then some of the some monsters that can be just a basic monster, mostly the giants like the fire giant and the frost giant, can also be advanced very simply by using a class, by adding a class to it and giving them original feats. So those are the kind of things that you'll be finding in the Monster Codex. It won't be adding any, I believe, new races to it, but it will be expanding a lot of the races that we already consider races with a larger civilization, and that we can expect variation when we bump into them.
Yeah, and as far as what comes in the future beyond that, we don't know. Now, for those of you wondering why we went into this in such detail, it is that these core books and what they do and what role they have in the game really defines the rest of the Pathfinder experience for most players. These are most of the options that you'll have for creating characters or running campaigns with Pathfinder, and they very much are required to use some of the more advanced material, because Paizo took a stance that D&D didn't, and it's that they're not going to publish these rule books and then forget they exist and never use them, like 3.5 did with several of their books, where they would introduce a whole set of classes and subsystems and then never refer to them because they only wanted you to use the core rule books or have those books to be required. And to counteract this, and also to sort of participate in the open community, Pathfinder, as a general rule, makes almost all of their rule material open content, which means that other companies are free to use this and adapt this and release content for it. And they host all of their crunchy bits from the rulebook line on their website in what's called the Pathfinder Reference Document, which is an online source that you can go to for all the rules material. So if you're running a book and it says you need this monster from Bestiary 3 and you don't have Bestiary 3, you can go to the PRD and get that monster and run with your game. So that really, to play Pathfinder, you don't technically need to buy the first book. It's all available online for free.
Yeah, absolutely. I own all of the books that have been released in the role-playing game line, but when I am running an adventure, I'm running off my laptop. I'm using the PRD. It's got any feat that might be in there hyperlinked, so if I'm running a monster and that monster has, I don't know, Whirlwind Attack, and I don't know offhand how Whirlwind Attack works, I know I can hyperlink, click on it, and I will have all the information on 2 separate pages rather than 2 separate books.
Mhm. And because of this choice of theirs, which I really am glad they did, you have access to things that just wouldn't be possible in most games without. You have the D20 PFSRD, which is an alternate version of the PRD that includes all kinds of other sources, including the campaign setting rules, the player companion rules, and a lot of third-party rules, all bundled up into one website. Which is an even larger reference material than the PRD. You have things like the Archives of Nethys, does the similar thing, um, but a little bit more cleaned up and doesn't include any third-party material. You have things like the iPhone apps and Android apps that keep all the rule material at your fingertips. Things like my own website, Param Spellbook, is possible, which lets you create reference cards for your spells. And of course, a huge amount of third-party material is possible because of this. And third-party publishing, which we'll go into after we go over the campaign setting lines, uh, is only possible because of the open stance that Paizo and Pathfinder have taken with their material.
Yes. Now, when we're talking about the rules material, we're not talking about adventures, which is why a lot of people consider the Adventure Path line Paizo's flagship, not just because it's their oldest line with the Pathfinder name on it, but because a lot of decisions that all the other products, a lot of decisions about all the other products, such as the creation of a book like Mythic Adventure, is specifically to support the Adventure Paths, which are 6-part adventures that will usually take a character from first level to about 15th level, although they've been pushing that all the way up to 20th level, even though their early stance was that the game breaks down above 15th level. All of the other products are there to support the adventure paths. This stall started with Rise of the Rune Lords, which has become kind of the backstory of the entire campaign setting. So Rise of the Rune Lords is an adventure you can still play, and in doing so you will learn a great deal about the main plots, the main movers and shakers, and the main populations of Golarion. And as you go through the different adventure paths that were released, and there have been over a dozen of them at this point, with more of them to come, no end in sight, in fact, you will constantly learn new areas of the game, new factions, new threats. Not the game, sorry, the world. And you just realize just how expansive Golarion is by the adventures that you as a character can have in that world.
And the adventure path is an extremely important part of Pathfinder experience. Whether if you basically what they provide is an entire campaign at your fingertips, but with the core books, and then they expand that with supplemental material available in all the other lines. You basically have all you need to run all your characters through it and just really have a high quality experience playing Pathfinder, and it also serves as an example of what the system is capable of, what kind of games you can run, even if you don't plan on running them yourself.
Now, if you plan on running an adventure path, there is, in addition to the 6 products that you can buy, there's always a free PDF of just a primer for the adventure path, so that you can read about. First of all, you can read about what the setting is and what the stories you can expect are, and then it goes a little bit into detail of any of the subsystems that are being introduced and provides some support material for those subsystems. So if you're curious about Skull and Shackles, you can get some basic versions of the vehicle combat rules for fighting ship to ship in the free supplement that came out for Skull and Shackles. And there's a lot of different things like that that just give you a taste of the adventure paths, because buying a single adventure path is kind of expensive, and buying an entire adventure path gets more expensive. And then there's a lot of material for every adventure path. There's cards, there's miniatures lines for some of the adventure paths. You can very easily spend a lot of money on an adventure path that you maybe aren't that committed to. Luckily, Paizo has a lot of different ways that you can get a sample for it. Another way is if you go on the message boards, each adventure path has a moderated but uncensored subforum dedicated to it. So you get to hear GMs and players experience their personal opinions on all these adventure paths, so that you can go towards deciding which of these many adventure paths, some of which are similar, some of which are very different, which one most fits what you want from the game.
And the other 2 lines book lines that Pathfinder produces are the Pathfinder campaign setting line and the Pathfinder player companion line, and these are really two sides of the same coin here. They both detail the world of Golarion, and which is the campaign setting that Pathfinder bases its material in, which is has been called the greatest kitchen sink ever made, because it has basically what Galarian is a very pulpy fantasy world where they tied in a lot of the influences that the Dungeons and Dragons game has had over its many years, as well as a lot of other external literature influences and influences from other cultures of the world, all sort of mashed up into one coherent campaign setting world where it makes sense when you have something like a Western-ish gunslinger next to a Tengu assassin next to a knight of the Crusade fighting a giant robot spider from space.
Yes, these are the books. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. But it might sound crazy, but it's really well written, extremely well done. This is the primary draw to Pathfinder for a lot of players, myself included, and it does manage to tie all these things together by really leaning on its pulpy roots. These are the 50s and 60s novels, comic books, and movies, the B movies. That is just this like height of adventure and absurdity all sort of mashed together, where the rule of awesome is almost more important than the rule of simulation.
These are the books that if you potentially are a collector or a completist, these are the ones that I would say really are the ones you should pick up on a case-by-case basis, especially the campaign setting line. There's a lot of really good, interesting reads because Paizo puts a lot of they make sure that quality writing is a high priority for them. But the campaign setting can be so overwhelming because it is such a kitchen sink that if you never plan on going to the Jade Regent, you will have all kinds of information about the Jade Regent that will just be kind of cluttering your brain and confusing you if you can't handle it all. So there's great stuff in here, but if you only plan on running Kingmaker, then there's only very specific books that are considered required reading, and even then, it's more supplementary reading. It will enhance your experience, but it's not required beyond the actual adventure path modules.
Yeah. And the campaign setting line is mostly for GMs because it has all the secrets and all the things about running the books. And these are thicker books. They usually go for about $20, and they're 64 pages, soft covers. And the player companion line, as the name would suggest, are books focused towards the players, and they include things like the Pathfinder campaign setting primer, Knights of the Inner Seas, Dwarves of Golarion, all the things you need to know about playing specific type of player themes in the campaign setting itself. These are usually anywhere from $10 to $12 to $13 now, I think, and they are 32-page soft covers, no spine books. These are like those old AD&D module book shapes, which brings us to the final book line in the Pathfinder line, which is the Pathfinder modules line, which are independent one-shot adventures. Some of them do link together. These are adventures that you can run that are pre-made. Some of them are extremely well written, like Realm of the Fell Knight Queen, Dragon's Demand, and these one-off adventures in the line, so that you can run adventures in Golarion without committing yourself to running an entire campaign in the adventure path line. Now, these have recently transformed to where they used to be those really thin adventures like you would see in early 3rd edition and all throughout D&D's life before that, soft cover stapled up booklets, to now they only release them once every quarter instead of once every other month, and they are big, thick 64-page monsters, or actually they're 96-page monsters. which involves like Dragon's Demand will take you from 1 to 7, uh, which is a big, huge range for an adventure, and they've become more in depth and come with a lot more supplemental material now.
Now, originally, when Dragon's Demand came out, the idea was that this refresh of the Pathfinder module line would be mega adventures. So they're not going to be quite the scope of an adventure path, but they're going to be much larger than a Pathfinder Society adventure. You are going to be able to span multiple multiple levels, and when you're done, you've made a significant impact on the world, and hopefully there's enough hooks that you can continue to campaign on your own or tie it in with an adventure path or however you want to proceed. What has happened since Dragon's Demand is that some of these are collections of tied together adventures that aren't a single overarching plot like Dragon's Demand was. So the Pathfinder module line seems to be in flux right now, but Owen Casey Stevens, who was, and I guess technically still is, a significant member of the third-party publishing community, he's been hired on specifically to lead the Pathfinder module line. So I expect in the next couple of months we're going to see another transformation, and then that transformation is probably going to stick.
Yeah. It's definitely the least. It's the line that has the least spotlight, because the adventure lines are like in comic book. The adventure path is like in comic books. These are the major, huge crossover story arcs that where everybody's paying attention to, everybody's talking about, ties into every other book. And the module lines are the one-off 6-issue arcs of X-Men that you would read when they're waiting for the next crossover to happen.
That's it as far as options for you as a GM or a player to get into the Pathfinder role-playing game and its world, as far as playing the game. But there are several other options that, and I'm going to revise this, and sorry, Param, calling an audible. I put this in the wrong order. In addition to the first-party products that Pathfinder puts out, that Paizo puts out for Pathfinder, there are a number of tools that at one point were called the Game Mastery line, but are now also branded with Pathfinder, and are extremely useful for any GM or any player that is planning on getting into the game. The one that we already talked about was the pawns. Pawns are thick cardboard miniatures that peg into a slot base and are bringing more miniatures to life than any other miniatures line that's out there, although it's not the only miniature line that's out there. By releasing these boxes based on either the adventure path, which will have all of the monsters you need for the adventure path, as long as you also get the ones for the bestiary, which have one of every monster in the bestiary, and there's also one for the NPC codex. So right now, almost every monster that's been published in the game has some kind of physical token available in the Pathfinder Pawns line. It's actually extremely impressive, the amount of monsters they can pump out in this Pawns line, and they do the job. It's a very clear 3D, 2.5D representation of what the monster is. It's moving around the battlefield, and you can personalize it to your combat fairly easily. As long as you can figure out a way to manage having this many pawns in your collection, you can really bring your game to life in ways that just using generic pawns or tokens is not capable of doing.
Yeah. When the pawns came out, they really revolutionized the game. Up until now, 3.5 edition of Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder assume that you're playing the game when you get into combat with a battle mat, some form of miniature, and drawn-out terrain, and some of us enhance it with 3D terrain, and that's a topic well beyond the scope of this episode. But up until this point, getting those miniatures was a very expensive proposition. Probably the most expensive part of the role-playing game hobby was the miniatures, because before the pawns came out, you either had to get metallic miniatures that you painted yourself, or you got pre-painted plastic miniatures that have come out from various sources and have also now come out for Pathfinder, which we'll go into later. Well, not much point in going into it later. They also have a pre-painted plastic line that is actual molded miniatures for various sources. But on average, though, you're spending $3 to $5 per miniature, and that's for a normal-sized character. You can get some cheaper some other ways, but it's a very expensive proposition. You're talking thousands of dollars to build a complete collection of being able to pull out a miniature from any bestiary or campaign setting on a whim like that. And what the pawns did is like the bestiary ones, like $30 gets you a actually impressive looking pawn for every monster in the bestiary. So what would be thousands of dollars worth of miniatures is now $30. And sure, they're not fully 3D sculpted objects, but they still look very impressive. And if for people just getting into the hobby, this took a huge barrier of entry away.
You also mentioned the battle mats, and Pathfinder or Paizo is actually very good about producing really cool battle mats. There's two different lines that they offer: the flip mats and the map packs line. The flip map is your actually. What are the dimensions of the flip map?
They are 24 by 32. No, that's way too big. 18 by 24. Yeah.
18 by 24 inches.
18 inches wide, 24 inches long.
All right. And you can get the generic ones. You can get pre-printed ones, and these are often used in the adventure modules and in the published adventures to enhance your game. And so instead of having to draw out a map every time, you can pull out your forest path or your arena of doom, or they've got the red light district coming out. And these just fold out, you lay it out, and there it is. And it's really easy to use. They're dry erase. They're actually really high quality prints, and I quite enjoy using them. The other option are the map packs, which are a little bit more modular. So it's a 5x8, I believe, a 5x8 card that can be arranged sometimes in various ways. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 set things that you can use in there, but the idea is that these aren't necessarily... You've got a little bit more flexibility to them. So there's a lot of like just dungeon corridors, and you can use those to create various just winding, twisted paths through a dungeon. And while they're a little bit more generic, that's the value to them. You don't have to constantly be just drawing corners with your markers. You can actually be laying something out that looks cool, clearly presents what's coming up, and if there's any detail that a player notices on the map, maybe that inspires a small story or a modification to the adventure.
Yeah, of the two, I prefer the flip map options because they're extremely high quality, easily reusable. You slap them down on the table and you're done. Even the generic ones, if you get nothing but the generic ones, get the generic flip map because it's compared to other options that were available before the flip maps were created. I just prefer it just hands down to any of them. I have 4 copies of the generic map. Flip map, so that I can pre-draw my stuff and just fold it and put it in my backpack and then just like throw it out. Because these fold down. These aren't like the old vinyl mats, which you had to roll up and you had this giant poster type roll sticking out of your backpack everywhere you went, which got annoying at Gen Con when you're trying to carry those around. These fold up, they fit in your backpack or whatever you're carrying your books in. They're ready to go. And they're just great. They also make generic ones with textures on them now, so you have like a generic grass texture, a generic stone texture, desert texture, and I love those for 2 reasons. One, it's really cool to draw out like your forest scene on a grass texture when you need to customize it, and 2, when you're using 3D terrain, those generic texture ones, you just throw down the grass thing and then I put down my trees and my buildings and my ruins on top of that. It looks fantastic, and you still have a square grid.
The last first-party line that's worth mentioning, it's published by Paizo. It is Pathfinder Tales. So this is completely a fiction line. It's a series of novels that Paizo has 100% control over, and they're fun adventures that give you more context about the world. So I guess it really depends on how you like reading about the world. Pathfinder campaign setting is just very to the point. It's saying, this is what's interesting about this world, and here are some rumors you might encounter. Whereas Pathfinder Tales are first-person or third-person in recounts of those interesting things in the campaign setting. Just adds more context, and for the particularly well-done ones, really makes you just engrossed with different parts of the world. And I can say that I've learned a lot more about Pathfinder as a campaign setting from the Pathfinder Tales novels than I have from the campaign setting books that I've read.
Yeah, they're a great way to learn about specific areas and characters and what it's really like to live in these areas. Game fiction has gotten a bad rap throughout the years because there's been plenty of really bad game tie-in books coming in. I'm looking at you, Warcraft. Your books are horrible. Um, um, but the Pathfinder books, they went back to the pulpy roots of Pathfinder, and instead of just being generic fantasy book number 3, they're like, this is a heist tale that happens to take place in a demon-infested world wound. This is a buddy cop book setup where instead of buddy cops, it's a dude and his talking sword, and everybody hates each other. They take influences from other genres of fiction and tie them into Pathfinder, and really work it well together. And that's a nod to the fact that Pathfinder, the campaign setting, may be a fantasy campaign setting, but its influences are very far and wide, and it's not just your traditional epic fantasy Lord of the Rings stories that they want you to tell here.
We're going to briefly talk about the second party lines, or the licensed lines, because a lot of them are pretty much considered as core to the Pathfinder role-playing game as the stuff that comes first from Paizo. The first one is very similar to Pathfinder Tales, and that is the Pathfinder comics. We just talked to Jim Zub, who is the writer of the comics, in the last episode, and he talked about just how he approaches the characters, which are, unlike in the Pathfinder Tales novels, the Pathfinder comics feature the Iconics, and so there's a little bit more familiarity to the characters in the books, and it's fun seeing them having adventures with just a little bit more life to them than we get in the artwork and whatnot. That we only get snippets of their adventures. So Pathfinder comics have been breaking a lot of ground. They're published by Dynamite, but they are closely tied in with Paizo, and they are some of my favorite things that come out with the Pathfinder name on it.
Yeah, they're really easy read, very well written comics. They flesh out the characters, and they don't cover as much ground as the novels or the rest of the books can, because it's just not possible in the comic book format. They've really only covered 2 major areas, both in Varesia so far. But if you want to just sort of get the gist of what this Pathfinder thing is about, or what the setting's about, it's a really great way, and I think it's a great resource that you can pass out to your players and to get them very quickly up to date on what you're really talking about. Especially useful if you're playing any of the adventure paths that take place in Varesia or Sandpoint or Magnamar, of which there are 4? 5 if you count Jade Regent's opener.
There's plenty.
Yeah.
Varesia is a very popular setting.
It's really where they started the campaign setting. Pathfinder was designed inside out. They started at Varesia, detailed it very heavily, and then started to work their way away from Varesia. And that's how the campaign setting was designed. So a lot of the material takes place in this one particular area, which is this sort of wilderness on the edge of society, with a lot of Romani Gypsy influences and some Icewind Dale influences affecting things.
Another major licensed product for the Pathfinder is the Pathfinder miniatures, and we were talking about how great the pawns are, but not to discount how awesome the Pathfinder miniatures are. These are pre-painted plastic miniatures. And there's already a dozen sets of them. I'm sorry?
Oh, just holding one up for the camera.
Oh, okay, there we go. Oh, there we go. So that's a great example. That's Sheila Hydemark, who is a character that we often see in Pathfinder Society. She's a major character in the Shattered Star Adventure Path, which is the line that particular miniature comes from. And now she's appearing in the comic. And so that's something that the Pathfinder Battles miniatures do that the pawns don't do. They add a lot of the very specific characters. Actually, no, that's not true. The Adventure Path specific ones also release those characters. Well, you can get a more three-dimensional version of those characters, and a lot of the people that populate the world, especially my favorites, the Iconics, that every single set has had at least one Iconic in it.
Yeah. Eventually they're going to run out of Iconics, but I guess now they're adding 10 new ones, so nothing to worry about there. The kicker, the miniatures are created by WizKids, the guys who created Mage Knight and HeroClix. And at the time that they were released, they were notable for being much more detailed and with many more paint layers than we were used to seeing pre-painted miniatures having, especially with the ones like Sheila and the Iconics, where what would be considered the rare miniatures. The downside to these is they're released random packed. We in many interviews we've had, we've talked about why that was necessary to make the miniature line possible. But that means that when you buy the miniatures, unless you're going to like a store that sells singles, like you would buy single Magic cards or baseball cards, you're buying packs and you don't know what you're getting.
But there's a lot of options for buying singles. It's just that the commons will be cheaper, and the uncommons more expensive, and then the rares quite expensive at times.
Yep, and Dragon's most expensive of all.
Always.
Though they did release standalone Dragon packs that have helped combat that.
True, we've gotten the red and the white, right?
Yeah, the red and the white and one black.
Yes.
Oh, and a blue.
You're talking about the Gargantuans.
Yeah, there's also each pack also has a Gargantuan mini, each set that you can get as first as a case incentive, but then those are very quickly available as single purchases at semi-decent, reasonable prices for the size of them, and so there's a bunch of those out there.
Now, assuming you're still following along on the paizo.com/Pathfinder, it does also include the Pathfinder Adventure card game, which is a quite popular and well-respected game that is getting more and more expansions, and that we will not be going into because it's in a lot of ways an alternative to the role-playing game, whereas the original question was talking about Pathfinder, the role-playing game itself, and all the ways that he can, that Jared can play the game that he knows with all his gaming friends. So, Adventure Card Game gets our full support, but we're not going into it this episode because that's an entire topic that could be the subject of a whole other podcast. And not a podcast episode, a podcast.
Oh, yeah. We've had episodes dedicated to it in the past that you can go back to and listen to, including an interview with Max Ellinger, the creator of the card game, which was before it was released, that goes into epic detail about everything, including Legos to design the box.
Oh, I love that box conversation. I don't care. I don't apologize for it.
No. Finally, we get to our biggest topic associated with Pathfinder is the organized play program called the Pathfinder Society Organized Play. When you play Pathfinder, you can play it at home, you can play Adventure Paths, you can do all sorts of fun things, but when you want to play at conventions, or you want to play at game stores, or you want to just sort of participate with characters that you can take from table to table to table, the organized play provides that as an option. And it's called the Pathfinder Society Organized Play because the Pathfinder Society is the namesake for everything we've just talked about. This is a society in the campaign setting that are basically treasure hunters, lore keepers, and Indiana Jones wannabes that go through the world to find these secret places, to find these rare artifacts, to document, collect them, preserve them, and sort of understand the secrets of the world, all in the hopes that they become horrifically famous.
Horrifically?
Oh, it never works out well to be very, very famous in the fantasy world.
Now, much like the Adventure Card Game, Pathfinder Society is something that we could develop an entire podcast dedicated to that. So there's only so much we're going to talk about in this episode, which is just kind of a primer for all of these things. So the two main things that I want to talk about are how you find out more information about Pathfinder Society, because a lot of people look at it, they hear the paperwork, they hear it's mostly like Pathfinder, but different, and that different kind of scares them. So here's what you need to know if you are trying to start, if you're rolling up your very first Pathfinder Society character. First of all, you don't need to roll up your first Pathfinder Society character, and I mean that in two ways. One, you can just use a pre-generated character from the NPC Codex, or if you show up to a very first game because you hear somebody scheduling Pathfinder Society, and you want to see if it's for you, you want to see how it's different from regular Pathfinder, you can just use one of the iconics. There are a variety of classes at a variety of levels, so no matter what game is being run, there is a character that qualifies for that game. You can sit down, use a pre-gen, see what it's all about. But second of all, when I say that you're not rolling up your character, you're using points buy. There are no dice rolls involved in the generation of your character for Pathfinder Society. All of these rules are in the core rulebook, except I believe the non-random hit points. You're going to need to read the Guide to Pathfinder Society Organized Play, which again, this is a 30-page book. This could be a little bit intimidating. So that's something that if you're a little bit worried, you don't want to dedicate that much time to something that you don't know if that's your version of the hobby that you want to explore, You can talk to your venture captain, because the most important pages in the guide to Pathfinder Society are the back couple, which provide email addresses for, at the time of its publication, the people that were in charge of your region. So the whole world is divided up into regions. Some of them it's one venture captain per country. Some of them you've got several venture captains, venture lieutenants for a single city. It all depends on what the demand of Pathfinder Society is in that area. Find that person, email them, find them on Facebook, get in touch with them. They are volunteers who love talking about Pathfinder Society, so do not feel worried about getting in touch with them and bothering them in any way. They want to get you into the game. They are happy to talk to you about it.
And also, if you don't see your region area, or if you know that in your particular area there isn't a lot of Pathfinder play, there is also venture captains dedicated entirely to online play now. So because you can, through a variety of resources, play Pathfinder or any RPG you want over the internet with other players. And they have venture captains who's dedicated to arranging and supporting online play and making that happen. So even if you live at the top of Antarctica, or bottom of Antarctica, depending on how you orient yourself, and you get that 6-hour window of internet access, you can schedule a game in there and get some Pathfinder on.
Now, if you are still committed to rolling up your first character, all you need to do is check out Pathfinder Society, or Paizo.com/Pathfinder Society /about/additional resources, or click on the Pathfinder Society link on the left-hand side of Paizo.com, and you'll find a player resources boxed area that has a link called Additional Resources. This lists every single book that's ever been published by Paizo that has crunch rules in it, and whether it is or is not valid for Pathfinder Society organized play. 90% of the options that have been made for the game are. Some of them are not for either reasons of flavor, because it's just too evil for Pathfinder Society, which is supposed to be a neutral with good leanings group. Some of them have had problems using the way they fit into the organized plays structure have created some issues, so very rarely there is an option that is banned for balance reasons. But for the most part, you can expect that if a book has been published by Paizo, that option is available to you. The one thing that I will say about this list is that some of the books are listed inclusively, some of them are listed exclusively. So you really have to find the book that the option that you want is from, and then find sometimes the chapter that it's in, and check to see if it says that the feats listed are allowed or the feats listed are banned. It's a little bit inconsistent, which is unfortunate, but it's done in the name of saving as much space as possible, because the additional resource page, as it is long and, like a lot of other things about Pathfinder Society, potentially intimidating. So in the name of minimizing the amount of space, there's a little bit of potential for confusion. So just make sure you're reading every word relevant to the thing you're looking up.
Yep. As a general theme, the things that are excluded from Pathfinder Society are any sort of item creation, because they want to keep wealth levels balanced, and a very few balance issues, some of the evil stuff, like he said, and any of the alternate rule systems that are different from default. So you can't use advanced race, build your own races. You can't use the Words of Power magic system. The downtime rules really don't fit in much in Pathfinder Society. So the alternate rule systems aren't really represented here.
The other thing is if you want to run for Pathfinder Society. So this is a little bit more restrictive than running for a home game, because you're supposed to run things as written. Stay tuned for later when we answer people's no questions, because there's very specific questions about how to run a Pathfinder Society adventure that have been asked. But how to find a Pathfinder Society adventure, that is very similar to the additional resources. If you click on Paizo.com/Pathfinder Society, or Paizo.com and click on the Pathfinder Society logo on the left-hand side, in that same box below where it says Player Resources, you'll find GM Resources. And you'll find a full list of adventures that are Pathfinder Society legal. Most of these are Pathfinder Society scenarios, they're called, which are short adventures that can be run in 4 to 5 hours for the most part. But it also mentions some of the Pathfinder Society modules and even adventure paths that have been made legal for Pathfinder Society and have chronicle sheets for them. The other parts of GMing, you might also be the organizer. If you click on GM resources, it again tells you step by step how you're supposed to set up an event, which involves clicking the My Pathfinder Society link, which is on that gray bar at the top of Paizo.com that sometimes gets overlooked, but actually is, at least for Pathfinder Society, one of the most important bars. If you click on it, or if you click on any of the other links on that page that tell you how to organize an event, then you can either find an event and see if you can just add a table to that event, or you can start a whole new event. And these could be public or private events. They could be online, they could be at a store, they could be at your home, they could be at a convention. There's very little limiting what qualifies as a Pathfinder Society event, only that when you are running it, you're running a Pathfinder Society sanctioned adventure, and you are following the rules, which are basically follow all of the game's rules as much as possible.
The big advantage to playing Pathfinder Society is you get to make a character and take him to a variety of GMs and experiences and travel with that character and just get to play with a whole lot of different players from around the world.
Finally, I will point people towards PathfinderSociety.net. This is an amazing resource, and it takes a lot of what's great about the forums at Paizo.com, which have so many sub-forums that sometimes it could be hard for someone who's new to Paizo.com to find exactly what they're looking for. It cleans that up, and it's completely dedicated to Pathfinder Society. So there's blog posts dedicated to Pathfinder Society. There are tools dedicated to Pathfinder Society. This includes online play. Any aspect of Pathfinder Society is included there, as well as some valuable links for anyone that is looking for more information on the different things that you may hear about at a Pathfinder Society table. It's the be-all, no, sorry, it's not the be-all, end-all of Pathfinder Society, but it is one of the greatest new tools that is available to Pathfinder Society players, and it's expanding every day. So if you're interested in Pathfinder Society, the two places you can look are Paizo.com/Pathfinder Society or PathfinderSociety.net. It should be noted, one of them is official. Paizo.com's is the official Pathfinder one, but PathfinderSociety.net is run by venture officers, and those are the people that, again, those are the volunteers that help run Pathfinder Society, and 5-star GMs, which are people that have GM'd so much that they get the most stars you can get for GMing.
Yeah. And I lost my thought there.
Param, I'm going to say that we skip over talking about the third-party publishers, and I'm moving that to the shoutouts because we're a little light on shoutouts this episode.
Yep. Just real quick to say that Paizo is not the only source for Pathfinder books. A lot of excellent Pathfinder material is produced by third-party publishers because Pathfinder is published under the Open Game License. They also have their own Pathfinder Compatibility License, which allows you to do a lot more than the OGL allows. So a lot of fantastic independent publishers have released hordes of material, filling in a lot of the gaps that Pathfinder itself doesn't fill in, and we'll go over them in the shoutouts.
And finally, the one last specific thing that Jared asked for advice on, it's links. Well, we did mention that there are links on PathfinderSociety.net. And the other thing is, I don't know if we've brought enough attention to this, but on the 35privatesanctuary.com website, there is a links page, and I update this pretty frequently with the coolest tools for Pathfinder players. But there's a certain broadness that needs to be applied to this. So as much as I enjoy Everyman Gaming, and we've got Alex Agunas waiting very patiently, thank you, Alex, for his turn to talk, that's something that I'm more likely to shout out to, whereas on the links we've got Param Spellbook, because that's an amazing tool. We've got the Pathfinder Wiki, which tells you a lot of information about the world. We've got the PRD and the PFSRD, all of these things linked. Typically, when I'm running a game, I will have my computer, like I said, and I will have the links page on 35privatesanctuary.com opened. And if there's ever a link that I feel like I need but don't have at the game, I will go into the administrative section, add it to the links, and that way I know that the next time I need it, it's there. All right, Param. I need a bit of a break to get some water and whatnot, so we'll be right back with the no question segment right after this.
Hang tight, guys. Now, while Ryan goes and takes a break and gets some water, it's a good point to remind that this is a live episode, as all No Directions are from this point forward, or actually 30 episodes back forward. So if you have any comments and you're watching us live on YouTube or Google Plus, in the YouTube version specifically, if you're watching us live on YouTube, add any. We're using the comment section as sort of a chat room. So any comments you add uh, during the episode, we'll be looking over. And if you have any specific questions you'd like to ask about anything we're talking about or anything about the game, now that we're going into the no question segment, which is a segment where we specifically answer your questions about Pathfinder, just go ahead and hit us up, and we'll do our best to get the answers to you. We'll go over this again at the end of the no question segment, but if you want to send us your questions in advance, you can email us at nodirection@hotmail.com. Go to our forums at 35privatesanctuary.com, click on the forums link, and there will be lots of places. You can go to the podcast section or Pathfinder section and just post up a question for us. But when you do either of these things, make sure you title it no question, then whatever topic you're going to ask us about, so we know that you want us to discuss it during the no question segment of the podcast. You can also contact us with questions or anything else you'd like at our Facebook page at facebook.com/nodirection, and also now you have access to our YouTube comments. So at youtube.com/nodirectionshow, you can ask us any questions there, and we will do our best to get them on the next episode where appropriate, and answer anything you have about it or go over any topic you'd like us to go over. It's also the best way to ask us any questions one-on-one when you need that sort of approach. All right, Alex, unmute yourself for a few minutes while Ryan comes on.
All right, I am ready to go.
All right, we got one last segment before it's your turn, but I wanted to get you in here real quick while Ryan's away. You run a really fantastic blog. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your blog?
All right. Well, back in February, I was wandering around the internet, and it kind of occurred to me that nobody really talks about GM design. I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel that being a good GM is very much an art form that you have to learn rather than reading it out of a book. As fantastic as the Game Mastery Guide is, it's stuff you got to put into practice. So I thought maybe sharing some cool tips I had discovered through my relatively short time GMing would work really well. I wrote I guess kind of like a Google Docs for it back in November, and I always kept saying, oh, I'm going to update this, I'm going to be regular, I'm going to post things, and I never did it because it was a Google Docs. I couldn't really measure myself or limit myself, so I always burned out. I figured making a blog would be a good idea, and I started by going over how to build encounters, how to actually challenge your PCs, because a lot of times the art of encounter design can be really challenging. I go over different tricks for using skills. Like, I believe on Monday I just did an article on tips and tricks for using the perception skill. And really it's just me talking about different things you can do to help your game as a GM. And then on Fridays I do a iconic, not really like Valoros or Sione design, but just really cool character builds that you can try, because another thing that I see is that a lot of newer players gravitate towards these very, I'm hesitant to call them cookie cutter builds, but it's probably the best term I can come up with. Very similar builds that get used over and over again. And in a game like Pathfinder, there's no need to be so rigid in your thinking. There are tons of diverse options you can do. So I try to help expand people's skills both as GMs and as players by giving advice. I post Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and I don't think I've missed one yet. So I'm sure someone will tell me I'm wrong at some point, but I'm pretty good at it for the most part.
Awesome. Well, thanks for talking to us about that. We'll have more news regarding that very shortly when we give you your proper introduction when your segment starts. But in the meantime, Ryan has rejoined us. Welcome back, Ryan. Hope your voice is feeling better.
Yeah, I gotta warn you, I just took some NyQuil, so we may have me for another half hour.
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, let's try to hang in there and get into... do we want to do the banter topic after all, or just skip into questions?
The banter topic was tied into one of the questions, but now I'm worried that... Because we've got a lot of questions. Do you want to save that for another special episode? But we've got Alex here. No, let's do this.
Okay, guys, strap in for an extra long no direction. All right, guys. We try to keep the show under 2 hours. It usually hits 2.5 hours. This one's already past that, so sorry, guys. We'll do better
No,
when
it's
we're
not
not
past
talking
that.
about the entirety of Pathfinder.
This
All
one's an
right.
hour and a half, Param.
So it's come on. Oh gosh, really? Only an hour and a half?
So far.
Wow. Okay. So what's come up as Pathfinder has matured, and as many books have been come out there, is the question: is Pathfinder rules bloated? This topic comes up pretty regularly, especially from Pathfinder detractors, and lately even Pathfinder fans, as more and more books have come out for the game. So the question is, really, is Pathfinder bloated? What are your thoughts on this, Ryan?
Me? No. Pathfinder is not bloated. And the reason I think this is because Paizo has done a really good job of categorizing everything that they've added to the game. So, yes, every single class may have some subsystems like Inquisitions and Bard Masterpieces and whatnot. And if you're just looking at it as a whole, it may seem like there's this gigantic bouquet of options. But looking at it individually, you've got your lump of tulip options and your daisy option, your rose options. I don't know why I'm using this rose metaphor. Um, that's just where I went. But basically, everything is actually categorized so that if you, as a player, are just coming to it and thinking, I want to play X, then you just find X options, and it actually takes the game from this gigantic thing down to this very manageable chunk. And that's, again, you were talking about this earlier with how Wizard of the Coast versus was supporting 3.5 versus how Paizo is supporting Pathfinder, and that's the best part about it, is that they introduce a new option, and then it's an option that's core enough to the rules that it can be expanded upon. So it's not like the Hexblade, which got introduced and then abandoned by Wizard of the Coast. It's the Inquisitor, which is such a core concept to fantasy that there are new ways you can go with the Inquisitor later on. And then on the flip side, as a GM, yes, again, it might look like you have to know everything. And there is a lot of crossover in the region, so if you're looking at the campaign setting, yes, suddenly you're running Rise of the Rune Lords, and you will have to know that one of the NPCs comes from Tian Sha, but that's a minor thing, and as long as you know enough to find the link on Pathfinder Wiki, you can manage that information you need and just make a smooth trend and run your game still smoothly. And as far as mechanical options that you need to know, you've only got 5 characters that you really care that much about. And so as long as you know every subsystem and every weird thing that those 5 characters are using, then the odd NPC that will have something weird, wing it as best you can, and then just keep going on with what you're most familiar with, which will be the core rulebook options, which is what makes up the majority of the monsters, the majority of the things you'll encounter in published adventures.
I think this answer gets a bit complicated depending on how you want to view it. Personally, I don't think Pathfinder has become rules bloated yet. Specifically, when you talk about the rules parts themselves. The actual rulebook line of products, which is where the majority of the crunchy bits of Pathfinder lives. Now, of course, Pathfinder is a very crunchy game. When you compare it to something like White Wolf or Spirit of the Century, yeah, it's got a lot of rules on it, but compared to other editions of Dungeons & Dragons, it's not quite as bad. Or other crunchy things like MechWarrior, which has a billion rule books added to it too. So if you're talking about just the core rulebook line that doesn't tie into the campaign setting at all, you're talking about 13 books that Pathfinder has released in the hardback line. 5 of them are monster-focused books. 3 of them are alternate rule systems, and so that leaves the other. My math is broke. So there are 6. The other 6 books are actual crunchy player bits that you actually need to sort of know when you're talking about. So you've got the core rulebook, the advanced player's guide, the 2 ultimate books, and ultimate equipment, and the race guide. That is all the player crunchy bits in the rules section. And we'll get Alex's opinion on this shortly. But when you compare that to previous editions of Dungeons and Dragons, I went ahead and did my homework and applying the same rule to them, not counting their campaign setting books, even if there was a crunchy book such as Player's Guide to Faerun, just anything that had to do with campaign setting excluded. You end up with, I didn't get the first edition. I know that one's actually pretty light, but second edition, 78 rulebooks, just pure generic rulebooks. 3.5, 69 hardback rulebooks. I didn't even count the soft covers. Fourth edition had 55 rulebooks total. 49 were hardback. 37 of them were pure rulebooks and not monster books. So when you compare it to the past versions of the game, Paizo still has a bit of leeway to go before they even get to the close to the amount of rules bloat that the past of D&D has had. Now, if you want to count campaign setting material, there are an additional 19 rule books in Pathfinder for the campaign setting that are sort of crunchy, but again specifically meant for use in Galarian, and 19 rule books in the Player's Companion line that are sort of crunchy. But these are very tiny little books, and again, they're specifically tied in to the player's line, with the exception of the Adventurer's Armory and the Animal Companion, which are really just pure rule books. So, in my opinion, Pathfinder has a ways to go, but that's comparing something we know is rules bloated to this and saying, is it rules bloated? I really don't think so. There are some splat out there, but it's just enough to really cover what we want to play without going completely overboard. They didn't release Ultimate Combat 2, Ultimate Combat 3, which they very easily could have done. And they try to let each book have a specific space so you know exactly what topic you're going for. Now, if you really like a rules light game, Pathfinder's not for you. That's when you need to be going to maybe some of the OSR retro clones that have really trimmed things down, like Castles and Crusades, or Swords and Wizardry, or 13th Age, or for one that's not a retro clone, you could do the
Savage Worlds.
Savage Worlds is very crunchy. It pretends it's not, but it's just as crunchy as 3.5. It likes to pretend it's not. I was thinking of Dragon Age. Dragon Age is actually a really, it's based on a video game, but it's become one of the best-selling RPGs out there. It's a very well-designed, very light system that's not a retro clone if you want to play like that. But that's my opinion. I think they have a ways to go before they're really bloated, and I think that they choose their ground smartly. Now, as for the campaign setting, it is the opposite. There is so much campaign setting material out there, it can easily overwhelm you. This is it. I would wager to guess that it is at this point even further covered than even the Forgotten Realms, as the amount of books and detail that they put it out for the campaign setting.
Now, you were talking about a number of books, but what about page count in total? I feel like the campaign setting will still be short of Forgotten Realms.
I don't know. I did not do page count totals. I do know that while Pathfinder releases books every month, several of them, they tend to be on the lower end of the page count scale, and the big hard books are kept to 3 or 4 a year. And only recently they did 2-3 campaign setting hard books, and the rest are just rule books.
Now, Param, while I was gone, did you give Alex his full introduction?
No. I did not. So
well then.
I'd let him talk about his blog, but
then joining us for this discussion and to handle our Crunch questions, and soon he'll be joining me as my Crunch co-host on the Private Sanctuary podcast. We've got the Everyman Gamer himself, Alex Agunas.
Ooh, that was a great introduction. Thank you.
Well, that's what I do. I introduce things. Alex, what are your thoughts on Rules Bloat?
All right. So before I give my thoughts on Rules Bloat, I want to do a follow-up to Param talking about the different aspects of the previous edition. I'm actually playing in a Wrath of the Righteous campaign that's set in Forgotten Realms. So the whole world wound is like on one of the Elven Islands out in the middle of the ocean, and it's been pretty cool. But the problem is that I bought the Inner Sea Gods book, and so I tore through the Inner Sea Gods book, absolutely adored it, and then I went to play in this campaign, and I was like, you know what, I really want to be an Inquisitor of the Moon Maiden, and that would be awesome. And so I grab a PDF of Faiths and Pantheons from 3rd edition, and I rip it open, and you have no idea how disappointed I was. Like, this article on this major deity is taken up about half of her space allotment, which is only like 4 or 5 pages. You know, it's less than any of the core rule books that Pazio gave their gods, and most of it is taken up by a stat block for like a CR 60 god. I'm like, when am I ever going to use this? I want to know more about this god and how I can worship her. So I definitely think that the campaign setting has a lot more information and flavor on it than anything that's come out of Wizards of the Coast. But on the other hand, I'm hesitant to call it bloat, segueing into my thoughts on bloat, because to me, bloat is when you have so much rules or information that it's staggering to actually process, to go through. Like, it legitimately hampers your ability to build a character because everything is spread out. As an example, one of my favorite role-playing games is the Star Wars Saga Edition from 3.5, and awesome rules system and really great character building options, but the problem is that all those options are spread out everywhere, and they're not very easily codified, they're not themed, it's very difficult to navigate them. So to me, rules bloat is as much of a navigation issue as it is a playstyle environment issue. I don't think it's a mechanics issue, and this is coming from me being kind of a game designer, a freelance designer person. To me, when I sit down and I'm looking at my rules, I'm like, okay, well, you know, if I know that I want a character who can fight well, I should probably pull out my copy of Ultimate Combat. I might want the Advanced Player's Guide. If I'm doing Mythic, I'll pull out Mythic Adventures, but I don't really need to look at Ultimate Magic because that's all on Magic users. I'm playing a Cavalier or whatever. And I know where to look to find the information I want, which to me, in and of itself, helps lowers bloat. If I want an option to play in, I have no idea, the barbarians up north, the Ulfin regions. If I want to be a Mammoth Lord, I know where to look to be a Mammoth Lord. And you don't really see that a lot in Dungeons and Dragons because you have Player's Handbook 1, Player's Handbook 2. Is the Warlock in the core Player's Book? Is that the 4th one? Is that number 5? And to me, I think that artificially creates bloat. So I think as long as Pazio keeps doing what they're doing and grouping their material very clearly in the sense that you can find what you're looking for, the options are reasonably balanced against each other, and for the most part, things outside of the core rulebook don't really overwhelmingly overpower and overshadow the things you see in the core rulebook. I mean, you know, people are going to talk all day about how the X class is so horrible and nobody's going to play it anymore when the advanced class guide comes out, but I don't really think that's going to happen. And overall, I think bloat, like I said, is more of a problem with your environment. How much is your GM letting you use? How much is your GM letting you pull from? If you think there's too much GMs, just stop it. You don't need to let every single option into your campaign if you're not comfortable with it. And you know, to me, bloat is something that you can solve. It's not something that Pazio has to completely reinvent their system to fix for you.
All right, I'm going to have to call a foul on you for your pronunciation of Paizo.
Oh, did I say it wrong?
There's only one I. It's not Pazio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Rhymes with Pido.
Pido, okay. So if that's the worst mistake I make tonight, though, I'm going to say I did pretty well for my first podcast.
No, you're doing fine. I just had to call you a foul on that. Which, actually, I should point out that I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think that you're saying it very well. The first thing I said shouldn't have been a criticism. So
that's fine. Remind me to tell you my marital maneuvers story. That's a great Tome of Battle story. Which we could segue.
I used to call somatic components semantic components.
That's pretty good too.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good.
There's only going on with this a little bit. There's only really been 2 times with Pathfinder that I've really felt overwhelmed with the amount of material out there. The first is anytime I'm running Pathfinder Society. it's a fantastic resource, but because they allow everything, a good responsible GM needs to be familiar. It doesn't need to know it by heart, but needs to be cursorily familiar with everything if you're going to be running, especially as you get higher level or you're doing it at like major conventions where there's a higher expectation of performance, or if you decide to, or well, it's sort of a prerequisite before you become a venture lieutenant or venture captain or any other officer or coordinator. And that's a section where you have to know all the core books, but then you also have to know general idea of what's in the player's companions and a lot about the campaign setting, and that can get a little bit overwhelming. And the other time I felt overwhelmed was when running the Wrath of the Righteous Adventure Path, which I'm currently doing. It very smartly is trying to tie in everything that makes Pathfinder itself. It's using almost all the rules at once, and it's mostly overwhelming my back. It's very easy to reference, but it's overwhelming my back because I'm having to carry or have access to pretty much every hardcover ever produced to run this thing, with the exception of the race guide. It uses all kinds of rules from Ultimate Combat, downtime rules, kingdom building, the mass combat rules. It uses, of course, it uses Mythic Adventures because this is the Mythic Adventure Path. It uses every single bestiary going. Characters in it use every single option available in the core rulebook, Advanced Player's Guide, Ultimate Combat, Ultimate Magic. And while it's very good at pointing out where I need to go and makes it pretty easy for me to just grab a book, flip to the right page, and get going with it, just running this particular adventure path has overwhelmed me because it takes everything. Now, we've already heard that from Eric Mona in our last episode that this is something they've recognized and won't inflict on us again. But it was very ambitious, and it just goes to show you that if you do intend to take full advantage of Pathfinder and use everything, you might want to go digital.
Yeah.
Because I had to build this
Pathfinder, PRD, PDF, and Pathfinder Wiki.
Yep. Oh,
or
the wiki
PFSRD is a little bit more all-encompassing as far as rules go.
And that's one of the things we need to mention. The online tools make running the game a lot easier. Every book is available in PDF format. You get those PDFs for free if you're a subscriber to the line as the books come out, or you can go buy them. And they made a point to, even though the retail price of the books go from $40 to $50 for the hardbacks, every single PDF of a hardback is just $10. So they've made running the game digitally a lot easier than a lot of other games have done. So while and of course they've partnered up with Eurolab and all kinds of other digital tools, so that you can run your games very easily if you want to just have an iPad at the table instead of a gigantic suitcase modified to hold my books. Oh, and I'm sad to say, as a report, the bookcase, the custom-made game case did not survive.
Oh no!
The sheer weight of everything it needed to carry wore it down, and it has expired. It no longer exists. I have its broken corpse still holding the books in the back of my Kia Soul, but I need to go back to the drawing board on how to make an ultimate game case.
Mythic game case.
Oh, Mythic game case. I'm thinking I'm going to go for stacking and modular this time. Instead of a giant long case, I'm going to get like a square filing cabinet box that looks like that on the trolley, and then several crates that I can stack on them as needed.
I think you're going to want to go with a case that you can spend a mythic point in order to cast Rope Trick with the duration of the day. I think that'll work out for you pretty well.
Yep. So
here's the situation. We're just shy of the 2-hour mark, and we've got a whole no question segment going, so we're going to have to do this almost lightning round style.
Ooh,
lightning round!
We'll give every question its due time, but I also want to make it as tight as possible. So that's the challenge right now.
Okay. So,
oh gosh, I'm so bad at conciseness.
So
well, we'll see.
Be back. So we will be back with no questions.
Baron, this is going to be a tough episode for you to edit.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. All right.
All right.
Let's just go right
Ready?
into it. Let's do. Liz Quartz has given us a quick, easy question, so let's
Yeah,
leave it at
I've
that
put
one.
her at the top of the no questions file. Google
Oh, I
Doc.
need to refresh that. Then. Okay, good. Okay,
All right.
starting
Three.
in 3, 2, 1.
In the no question segment, we take your questions about the Pathfinder role-playing game or about the Pathfinder hobby, and we answer them to the best of our ability. And bonus, we've got Alex Agunas to answer with, well, not just all the crunchy things, because there's more to Alex Agunas than just crunch. But man, does that guy know his crunch.
Well,
Our first
you.
question is from Paizo's own Liz Quartz. She wants to know our favorite non-Paizo Pathfinder product that we're currently using. I talk about these two products quite a lot, but in our Kingmaker campaign, Kingmaker would not be possible without the Book of River Nations, as far as we're concerned. It's been an invaluable resource. It expands upon the rules for kingdom building that are published in the Kingmaker campaigns, in the actual Kingmaker Adventure Path. But unlike the kingdom building rules in Ultimate Campaign, they add to the they add to the Kingmaker published versions of those rules, and so we've been running it for a long time, and this has been a great resource. It adds to everything we're doing, and a large part of our city is built out of things based out of the Book of the River Nations, complete player's reference for kingdom building from John Brazier Enterprises, and my character in that is a time thief, which is published by Rogue Genius Games in the Genius Guide to the Time Thief. It is a very skill-based character with a lot of temporal flavor that, wow. That partially because of the mechanics and partially just because I'm enjoying playing the character has made my part in that campaign particularly unique. Param,
right.
what about you?
I have two that are my absolute favorites. They complement each other well, and they have a very specific monstrous theme. And you already know what I'm going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my absolute top favorite third-party book ever produced for Pathfinder is the Tome of Horrors Complete by Frog God Games. This monstrous monster manual is, oh gosh, I don't even know how many pages. At
6
least
billion.
at least 600 pages, with hundreds of well-done monsters with Pathfinder for use in the Pathfinder role-playing game. From the 3.5 books of the same names, the Tome of Horrors 1, 2, and 3. These monsters, this monster book was so good that the original versions of this book were used in Rise of the Rune Lords to provide some of the monsters that has helped to establish Pathfinder, and is one of the few third-party products that they've incorporated into their own material. It's a great, gigantic book. I love having it. And my other favorite book I like to use is the Book of Monster Templates, published by Wright Publishing. And it is exactly what it says in the cover. It's a whole bunch of monster templates that are very well done, and you can use them to apply to any monster in the game. And I like using these two books together for that reason, because these are templates that I like the idea of monster templates. I really fell in love with it when D&D introduced it, but they didn't introduce all that many of them, and half the time you just end up using Fiendish or Celestial as the only two templates that see play. Pathfinder added a few more, such as Young and Advanced, to help make things easier for making monsters tougher and stuff. But the Tomb of Horror, or not Tomb of Horrors, but the Complete Book of Monster Templates has a whole bunch of templates that are very flavorful that you can just slap on monsters and get them out the door. And I just love it. So those two books together help add a lot of variety to my games, and show monsters that my players just aren't used to seeing. So it helps keep them off their guard, because I mean, I've been playing this game for going on 20 plus years now, and we've killed just about everything that you can kill. So anything that adds some variety to the combats is greatly. So these are my favorites.
Now, Alex, you're no stranger to third-party material. What are some of your favorites?
Okay, so I'm going to cheat, and for my first one, I'm going to say Owen Casey Stevens' entire talented class line. Like I mentioned in the last segment, I am a huge fan of the Star Wars Saga RPG. Owen was the lead designer of that system, and in it, it's basically the talented products are exactly like the class building system in that game. You have all of the classes in the Pathfinder rules. Owen is slowly working through them. He's got most of the martial classes down, but he takes all of the class features from most of the archetypes, breaks them into talents, and you build the character whatever way you want. I love options, so that to me is probably one of my favorites. You can just make some really crazy PCs and even villains that not necessarily are overpowered, but have ability combinations that experienced players aren't expecting. And I love using options that my experienced players, which all of my players have at least 5 years, though one who's played the longest has like 20 years. So whatever I can do to try to throw them off guard is awesome in my book. To that end, sometimes oldies and goodies are great. I love Ultimate Psionics. That's going to be my second choice from Dreamscarred Press. I bought this book. It is massive. It's as big as the Pathfinder core rulebook, and it's everything you could want for psionics. It's very innovative, very fun, but at the same time, it feels like Pathfinder. It's different enough without being alien, so I really like it. And I'm going to cheat on my last one because I'm sure everyone who's listening to me who knows my publishing history is expecting me to say this one, so I am. When you're a designer, you often design the things that you want to see in the game, and Pact Magic, my entire Pact Magic series is born from that. I love creepy supernatural things. I love abilities you can't explain. I love the weird. It doesn't even have necessarily to be horror, but just that kind of crazy stuff. I really enjoy throwing it against my players, and I'll never forget the first time I threw a binder or I guess with my rules it's the occultist, but I'll never forget the first time I used one against an experienced player, because that player was expecting, like, he was flinging all these supernatural abilities, and my player thought, oh look, that guy's an elf, he's probably casting a spell, I'll just step next to him and get an attack of opportunity when he tries it again. And he did it again, and it's like, hey, supernatural ability, sorry bud, and he's like, what? That was fun. So those are my top 3 choices, and the first one's kind of cheating, so I'm sorry.
I thought the first one you were just going to say your favorite non-Paizo Pathfinder product is Owen K.C. Stevens.
Yeah, you know what? He kind of is, but now he is a Pathfinder product because he works
That's
for
true.
them, so I don't know if I can say that anymore.
Yeah, I'll say this again in the shout-outs, but I've been so impressed with the quality of his products that I just put a blanket yes permission on anything Rogue Genius Games puts out, as long as it's not, the unbalanced feet line.
Yeah.
Well, yes, if it's specifically the ridiculously overpowered feats, then they could be forgiven. It's in the title.
Even that line is really funny because you have no idea how many people have emailed Owen and said, these feats aren't overpowered enough, they're actually somewhat balanced.
Our next question comes from board member N. Darren, who posted on the forums at 35privatesanctuary.com. Says, do you think the rate at which Paizo is churning out Pathfinder material is affecting the quality? Now, we alluded to this last episode when we were talking about how Paizo has put up a new editor position. It seems like a day can't go by before there's a new thread on Paizo.com about some lapse in editor quality or editing quality for the products. So, Alex, let's start with you this time. Do you think that the quality of the material has been affected at all?
Absolutely. I mean, did you see how that head editor misspelled the word pharaoh on the back of his adventure guide? Man, what are they paying that guy? No, I'm kidding. I actually think that the Pathfinder role-playing game is fairly well edited, but clearly, from the mass of products they're doing, I mean, every year they've done one more hard covered rulebook than the year before. What are we up to? Is it 3 or 4 this year? I don't.
We are getting 5 this year.
We're getting 5, right? Because we're getting the Emerald Spire. So every year since at least I started playing, there's been one more. So I don't personally take the sign of them having another editor as they perceive a lapse in quality. I see it as they're trying to, provide more to their players, and so they want to improve upon that. And, if someone spells the name of a major ruler wrong on the back of a book every now and then, it happens.
I do think that they were getting a bit overwhelmed there last year, in the latter half of the year before that, where they picked up the pace, they committed to a lot of things, and were and this is about the time that the Kickstarter was happening for Pathfinder Online. The card game was coming out. Lots of stuff were happening at once, and I did see an uptick in the amount of typos that were showing up, and a few questionable feats started hitting things. I don't think it's been horrible, but I thought it was definitely noticeable. I've noticed it less the last few months, and I think that them hiring more staff for editing is definitely a good thing. But I don't think it was crippling to the game at all.
Yeah, and I think quality is a very important thing to focus on because maybe typographical errors have gone up, but that doesn't actually affect the quality of the material or the game. It just means that maybe you'll be reading it and you'll stumble a little bit more often. And personally, I haven't particularly noticed that big of an increase in typos. Not enough that I would have noticed if there weren't all these threads pointing them out. The only time that this has really affected my gameplay, there's a Pathfinder Society scenario with a word puzzle which involves a cipher, and the cipher has a typo in it. So that was kind of frustrating. But beyond that, I would not say that the quality has gone down. And yes, Paizo is putting out more material, but Paizo is expanding its staff every couple of months. There's new developers being added. Yes, the new designer is replacing one that left, but Sean K. Reynolds is one of the few staff members to leave Paizo in the last 5 or 10 years, whereas they're constantly adding new staff members. So as they're expanding, as Pathfinder is becoming a larger and larger brand, so too is the Paizo staff that's in charge of Pathfinder. So I think they're staying on top of the rate that they're churning out with new material, personally.
Yeah. And yeah, every now and then there's a bum book or a bum option in a book that we don't really like, such as the fact that the Blood of the Night was supposed to be the Dampier book, and there's like only 2 things that the Dampier can take in the whole book.
But that's not so much editing as it is just the direction of a product.
Yeah, and then every now and then the Evangelist happens.
Which, Alex, did you want to counter our issues with the Evangelist?
Oh, I don't know. Should I? I haven't play tested the Evangelist, so I can't say for certain if my predictions are correct, because they are just predictions, and that kind of is what makes talking about it fun when you don't have math behind you, I guess. But as soon as math enters the picture, things just get kind of mean every single time. You sound like you're attacking someone when you throw numbers. But when I look at the Evangelist, because I was really curious about it after you did your Inner Sea Gods review, and to me, I personally think that the Evangelist, in a sense, is kind of like a prototype. One of the big, I don't want to call it a problem, because it's not a problem. Let's call it a side effect. One of the big side effects of Pazio's approach to class design, where as you level up, you get cool stuff, and most things scale with your level. One of the side effects of that I'm sure that wasn't really thought of at the time is that it makes prestige classes a little bit less attractive, because I really like my witch hexes, but no prestige class in the game lets me be better at the witch hexes I already have. So why would I ever want to leave the witch class? You could say the same thing for Cavalier and challenge damage, Inquisitor and judgment abilities. Spellcasters have always had this problem, even in 3.5, which is why all prestige classes felt like they had to advance spellcasting. I think the Evangelist is an attempt to try to make a prestige class attractive through multiple classes, while providing some really cool, neat little flavor for benefits without getting into that I'm never going to take this because it doesn't advance what I already have mindset. To that end, is it overpowered? It's definitely got what I would consider to be the worst capstone I've ever seen, which makes sense because of all the other benefits you get. It's kind of like every ability you get in the Evangelist is your new capstone, and it replaces your 20th level of that class. That's how I choose to look at it. I could be completely wrong, but until I build an Evangelist, I can't really talk about it. Maybe I'll throw that into iconic design somewhere.
Well, we can't dwell on this. We're in the lightning round.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Nick Zatrich asked via our No Direction Facebook page, do you guys have any general advice for someone who is working on their own campaign setting? Well, the first question that you should ask, Nate, is why? Why do you need your own campaign setting? Why don't the published campaign settings that exist out there Why aren't they fulfilling your need? And then focus on the why. Focus on what will be unique about your campaign setting. Beyond that, you have to ask about the scope. So will your campaign, like, is this something that multiple campaigns will take place in the same setting, or will this be for a single campaign? If it's for a single campaign, how far away from your base setting, from the core of where you're going to be, from your Varissa, essentially, do you plan on taking it? Do you really want to allow the players to go to any continent, different planets, different planes of existence? Those are the kind of things that if you don't expect to go anywhere beyond the main city, the main continent, then why design anything outside of the main city, main continent, beyond just this vague idea of, yes, there are other continents, and these are some of the stereotypes or cultural whatevers, hang-ups. So those are the two first questions. And then mechanically speaking, I would look at Ultimate Campaign. That's exactly what that book's purpose is. It offers a bunch of suggestions for subsystems you can use in campaigns, and then if none of those subsystems work for you, figure out a subsystem that really adds to the identity of your campaign setting. And then again, that's also figuring out what you want to do with your campaign. So that's another question to ask. What are you doing on this world? And how is it different from anything else that you can do on any other world? Alex, what about you?
I think you should read the chapter on building campaigns in the Game Mastery Guide. I think you should do everything Ryan says, and I think you should recognize that you will never be finished designing your campaign setting. Golarion is what I want to say 5 or 6 years old now. That's how old the Pathfinder role-playing game is. They still haven't run out of things to talk about, and people are always asking them questions. If you expect to ever be done, you will be a very unhappy person, and that's all the advice I can give.
Yeah.
Param?
Add to that, Ed Greenwood has been working on the Forgotten Realms for 30 years, and he ain't done yet. I think you really covered the basics, but never underestimate a really good map for when you start to do your campaign world, even if you're not going to detail it super well. So go online to things like the Pro Fantasy website and the Cartographers Guild and start looking at how they design maps, because if you make a really good map and it makes sense, then it can help inspire what needs to happen politically, geographically, things like that. So like learning little tricks like rivers always flow downhill from mountains towards the sea. Just that tiny little thing so that you don't have rivers running uphill away from the sea. And general little tips like that will help make your campaign world a lot better. But then everything Ryan said, especially the part about why you want to write this.
I'm going to add to what you said about maps, though, Param, is that beware of how concrete maps make your world. Because even if you look at the most extensive map that Paizo has published for Golarion, there's a whole continent with just a question mark on it. And the idea is that this is kind of a traveler's map of landmarks and not a satellite picture of the world. So if your map definitively says there are only 3 continents on this map, and suddenly you have a story reason that you need a 4th continent, well, what are you going to do? So keep your maps a little bit more focused. Focus on where you know the world is definitely taking place, and then just talk about anything that doesn't fit in that section of the map. Our next question comes from Tyler G. Sorry, Tyler, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. He asked us via No Direction Facebook page. He says, I used the Advanced Race Guide to recreate the Thri-Kreen from 3.5 and wanted to make a monk. It seemed a 4-armed character would not benefit from the extra arms if they were to flurry as a monk. Any suggestions then for a class to build an unarmed fighting Thri-Kreen? Param, can you summarize what a Thri-Kreen is?
Okay, a Thri-Kreen is this insectoid race from Dark Sun that has all kinds of arms. It's sort of like a mantis person. And they're really nasty, and a lot of people like them because they got lots of attacks around back in the 1st edition, 2nd edition days. So it's a fun class to build. One of the only ways you can build it is using the race guide, because you need to get 4 arms. the problem is he's absolutely right. A monk is not the class to roll if you want to make this character, because understand that Flurry of Blows, even though you make 2 attacks a round, it's not your right punch, your left punch. It never was meant to represent that. This is everything you do martial arts. These are your backflips, your kicks, your pushes, everything you can do. Any part of your body can be used as part of this unarmed strike for the Flurry of Blows. And because of that, you don't get any benefit at all for having a whole bunch of extra arms, because it just assumes you're using all of them anyway, anytime you go. So if you really want to do a whole bunch of attacks as a 3 keen, your best bet is to go, I think you want to go fighter. And the reason you want to go fighter is because you're going to need a lot of feats to make this work. And you want to go the unarmed combat feat. You want to go with, you're going to need Molly Attack, which is a bestiary only feat. And there's some question is if players are even allowed to take this thing, but this would be a case where you really need it. You're going to want to focus on weapon focus on this. You're going to want the extra damage that you get from being a fighter and making this your specialized weapon, being your natural attacks. You're going to want to the hard way to purchase a lot of the monk abilities, such as Stunning Fist and all the stance feats. And you're going to need a bunch of feats to do that, so the fighter's pretty much the best class to make that happen.
Another way you could do it is you can go Barbarian. Barbarian is going to have less feats, which has major drawbacks, as Param just said. The advantage of going Barbarian is you become a lot more mobile. Barbarian is a very mobile class, and one of the things you could do, I personally wouldn't do it, you could grab the Beast Totems, though. The reason I wouldn't do it is because Thry can already get all those crazy natural attacks, so Beast Totem doesn't do much for you. But the final Beast Totem in the set at like 12th level way down the line gives you Pounce, which means your creepy giant bug praying mantis guy could now attack with all 4 of his arms and his bite while charging at you, which is pretty terrifying to think of. While you're going on these raging, getting all these huge bonuses, it'd be a really nasty build, but you would definitely not be a monk. So if you want to be more of a martial artist kind of character, you should go a Param's build. If you're going for creepy, raging bug monster of death, Barbarian might work for you.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the Barbarian is definitely the way to go if you just want to get the most pure amounts of damaging attacks via this method.
Channon Vicada, sorry Channon, asks, I believe also via our Facebook page, Facebook.com/No Direction, since both of you are Pathfinder Society GMs. Oh, actually, let's pause. Alex, are you a Pathfinder Society GM?
Actually, I'm sorry, but I've never played a Pathfinder Society game before.
Well,
I've
got a whole series of Pathfinder Society questions that you're just going to have to sit out on.
Oh, I know, but it'll be terrifyingly sad. I'll see what kind of, like, if there's any little tips I can throw in, but a lot of this PF-specific stuff I'm not going to be able to help much.
So, Channon asks, what would you say are the differences, if any, in GMing a society compared to your home games? So, Channon, I assume by home games you're just talking about, you're not talking about the difference between running a canned adventure, which Pathfinder Society scenarios all are, versus running a home scenario, but you mean rather how you adjudicate rules and whatnot. Actually, he goes on to say, I assume he, sorry, Channon, if you're not a he, it says, listening back to old 3.5 Private Sanctuary podcasts, we talk about fudging, we talk about increasing and decreasing hit dice or AC, and yeah, these are all tools that are no longer at a GM's disposal. So that's, I guess, the main thing of it is that whenever I am making a decision, instead of just deciding what is the most dramatically interesting thing right now, keeping in mind that I still don't believe in the illusion of choice or in changing the rules to fit the story, if there's an ambiguous rule, I might just default to whatever the fastest thing is, whereas when I'm running Pathfinder Society, I will try and get somebody on it and looking up, is it something that's commonly debated? Is there any FAQs anywhere that we can look to for a solid answer so that if this continues to be an issue, we resolve it? And otherwise, kind of like what Param was mentioning earlier, Pathfinder Society can be a little overwhelming at higher levels. which, as someone, most people that are new to Pathfinder Society GMing will be GMing lower levels first, just because the majority of Pathfinder Society games are in that 1 to 5 tier. And as you get higher up, things do get more complicated. Although with Season 5, I've talked a few times about how I am really impressed with how complicated that some of the Season 5 stories, ramifications, and setups have been. It's also been a lot more prep that's required. So something that I will rarely do prep for my home games. For a Pathfinder Society game, I will read and reread the scenario. I will go to the shared GM prep folder, and I will use every resource at my disposal to be ready for the scenario before the adventure starts. Because I do know that I've only got these 5 hours to worry about, and I also know that, unlike with my home game where if I have a bad session, I can apologize, and next week everyone comes back. With Pathfinder Society, this may be the only game that these players are getting for months at a time. I don't know what their home games are like. So, I try to do my best. Yeah, maybe this doesn't sound great for my home group, but I try to do my best to make sure that every Pathfinder Society game I run is the best game I can run.
I just want to ditto everything Ryan just said there because he pretty much hit it down. But also to remember that you're also in a situation where you're very likely to be dealing with players who have never ran the game before at all. So you need to be prepped with that, and you also need to have a lot of material on hand, like blank PFS cards that they can register new numbers on, and pre-generated characters, and you need to know what those pre-generated characters do, because if you don't know what the character they pick does, it makes running the game difficult if a newbie asks you, well, how do I use this witch hex?
That all sounds like some great advice.
Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
I was going to say, that all sounds like some great advice that I can't comment on.
Excellent.
Along moving on.
Lines, Joshua Allison asks via our Facebook page, with Pathfinder Society being as inclusive as it is, he has noticed that rather frequently a person joins the event with behavioral, developmental, or cognitive disabilities. He's noticed that many of the fellow players will refuse, so the gamers other than the people that he's noticing with the disabilities, will refuse to be at the table with certain players. What can I do to support my PFS gatherings? I don't want people to be turned away, but in many cases their impact can be very detrimental to the game. Now, Alex, I know that this is actually something that hits home with you, so why don't you explain your
really
thoughts on this?
Okay, so I have a couple of different stances on this, which are going to really affect my opinion. First, I am an elementary educator, so a lot of this kind of stuff really affects my work area. I work as a one-on-one with a student, and I'm basically in this type of setting every single day. And in addition, my brother has Asperger's syndrome, which is higher functioning autism. So you have to understand that I am very biased when I say that I think that it is imperative for us as gamers to be inclusive of everybody, not just of people with disabilities, but of people of other like fandoms or groups or ethnicities as possible. Because when we're in a huge group like on the forums, it can be really easy to forget that we are a minority. I'm reminded of that every single time that I have to explain to somebody that I'm a publisher and what it is I publish, and then how it is that my writing works and why it's not a book they can go buy in Barnes and Nobles. And, you know, if someone is willing to join your game group, that should be all the reason you need to do your best to try to be understanding of the fact that, okay, this person definitely has some challenges they have to work through. And in many situations, like I know with my brother, he has tendencies where he'll start randomly laughing when it's not appropriate or quoting strange things. And, you know, I feel bad for my other players sometimes because it's like, I know that this might be a little strange, but at the same time, it's like you got to understand that everybody has their own specific needs when they come to your game table. And it's important to try to foster the thing you love throughout as many people as possible, because there are plenty of people with disabilities who wouldn't even give you the time of day if you told them that you wanted them to try this role-playing game thing, and here they are here trying to play with you. So it's kind of like, to me, if you see somebody who needs it, maybe just give them a nudge or reminder. You know, you're not really out of line as long as you're not being assaultive about it. If you're not attacking their behavior, for like, yo, you might want to calm down a little bit, or I think some of the players might be getting a little bit frazzled with your overreactions. Just be informative. A lot of times we assume that everybody thinks exactly like us, when sometimes all they need is that little like tap on the shoulder saying, "Hey, yeah, chill." That's all I want to say before I get too soapboxy.
I want to add on to here that to also be very careful to what extent you involve yourself with this, because unless you are a social worker, a developmental educational, don't try to be at the game table. This is not the venue for any sort of angle on that. Your job as a GM is to provide the best game possible for the players you have. Definitely encourage everybody to be as inclusive as possible. Try to let everybody have fun. But this is not a place for a social crusade. This is not a place for improv therapy or anything like that. It's best leaving those particular aspects to professionals in those fields.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. Oh, I definitely agree with that.
There's one bit of advice I will offer as someone who used to teach students with autism, is that often all someone with a processing disability needs is 10 seconds to process a question or a statement or whatever. So if you're noticing somebody is getting frustrated at the table, or just having reactions you're not understanding, or more emotional than you're understanding, there's a very good chance that they are trying to process the information as quickly as they can, or at the pace they are, and that you are offering them some advice that is not necessarily, that might help somebody without a cognitive disability, but is actually making things worse. So if you say, "It's your turn, what do you do?" and they're processing that question, and then you turn around and think like, "Oh, they didn't understand," so you ask them another question like, "Do you want to attack that guy next to you?" Now they're processing two questions, and it's like sand going through an hourglass. If you're throwing too many kernels of sand at simultaneously, it will block it up, and you're just making it worse. So if you're talking about someone that just has a processing disability, and a lot of autism and autism-related syndromes are processing disabilities, give a single command or a single question, and then count to 10 in your head. And if anyone else is trying to come up and offer assistance, and accept that they're trying to help, even if they're not helping, just tell them, "Nope, give them a second." Because that can solve so many of the just perceived issues at the table. Now, that's not going to cover everything, because there are some people that will have social disabilities or social misunderstandings. If it's what could be described as like a word vomit, if it's just someone that's just constantly talking, the best thing you can do is just to deflect and redirect it, and just constantly remind them, "It's game time, we're gaming right now," and tell them that, "Hey, we'll talk about that cool movie you really want to talk about. We'll talk about it after." And then after the game, talk about it after them, like actually make good on your promise. Besides that, I mean, we did have an issue in Montreal where somebody was just making sexist comments at the game table, and it became a question of, do we side with this person who, yes, he was having some kind of social disability, or do we side with people that are being offended by the comments he's making? And it's a case-by-case basis. Generally, I will side with the people that are being more inclusive, and so if somebody's making comments that are alienating other people, it's just hard for me to side with that person. So 90% of my advice is be understanding and be as inclusive as possible, but sometimes you have to choose between two different groups that are just not meshing together. Be as sensitive as possible and see what you can do, what alternative you can do to just banning someone outright from your table.
That was pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. I like to think I'm pretty awesome.
Next
Speaking
up,
of pretty
David,
awesome. Go for it, Pam.
Next up, David Gibson asks, when can you use a pre-gen higher than level 1? Specifically at conventions such as Gen Con, can you just play freely at higher level table with the pre-gen, picking a higher tier when mustering? Yep.
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 They say yep, so sure.
Everything there.
You don't have in Pathfinder Society. You absolutely do not have to have your own character. You could play pre-gen after pre-gen after pre-gen at any level slot you want, with one exception. You cannot play level 12 with a pre-gen.
That's true. But for all the ways that the tiers break down, 1 to 5, 3 to 7, 5 to 9, and 7 to 11, you will have a pre-generated character you can have. Some of them you have two, actually. For the 3 to 7 tier, you can either play the 4th level pre-gen or the 7th level pre-gen. And there's not actually any rules for this, but the accepted rule is that if you're playing, you play with the majority. So you don't want your 7th level Kira to be the highest level character at a table of level 4s if you're playing 3 to 7. But otherwise, if you're playing a 7 to 11, you can play Kira. You can play her at 7th level. If you're playing 5 to 9, you can play level 7 Kira. If you're playing 1 to 5, you can play level 4 Kira or level 1 Kira. So there's a lot of options there. And if you need any advice, ask the GM, because let's say you're playing a 1 to 5 table. Sometimes the level 1 character just doesn't really do much, whereas a level 4 person might. And if he's okay with a higher level NPC at the table, as long as you don't steal the spotlight, because if at the end of the day your 4th level Amiri has killed every single encounter, maybe that wasn't so much fun for the people that put a lot of thought and care into crafting their own character, which doesn't make them any more right to get all of the fun than you, but just something to keep in mind. But as far as the can you or can't you, your binary question, you can. You can play whatever fits in that tier, any legal Pathfinder Society pre-generated character. I guess we can go into what you then do with your Chronicle sheet. You can apply that to any character other than a character that is already that level or above, but it only comes into effect once you've reached that level. So if you play a 3 to 7 scenario, then you can apply it to a character that's level 1 or hasn't been created yet, and by the time he reaches level 3, suddenly he's already 3.1 or 3 and 1 experience towards his next level. Simple as that. Next, Dean Joan asks us via Facebook, I'm still relatively new to Pathfinder, and I'm having a little trouble figuring out how the Magus and its archetypes actually work. Would you be able to spare a moment or two to clarify this sometime? So, Alex, you're a crunchy guy. Why don't you talk to him about how the Magus works and how archetypes, and specifically he goes into stacking archetypes. How do they work?
All right, let's talk about the Magus first, because that'll be the first ball we want to hit out of the park. The Magus is a blend of the wizard and the fighter. He's got a spell book, but he can only learn spells up to about the bard's level. He's a 6th level spellcaster. The Magus is built around touch attack spells, specifically channeling those spells through his weapon via the 2nd level ability Spell Strike. When you play a Magus, you are essentially a glass cannon. You are somewhat squishy. You get a little better as you get higher levels because you have more and more armor available to you. But generally speaking, you're the guy who dishes out a ton of damage, and if you don't kill the bad guy, you're probably going to be down for the count in an hour or two, or a round or two, rather. And the Mega spell list is mostly consists of offensive spells. You got some buffs, mostly damage dealing. A lot of the really fun problem-solving spells aren't available to the Magus, so you got to keep that in mind. Once you get to about, I'd say 7th level, the class starts expanding upon its mechanics. You start being able to use your arcane power to augment your weapons better. You get to prepare more spells than you would normally be able to. And the general thing to remember is that what you want to do is, if you're taking a standard action, if you had to move or whatever, you cast a spell and then deliver it through your weapon with Spell Strike. Basically, you make an attack roll. If you hit, it's considered the free touch you need in order to cast the spell. So you do your weapon damage and the spell's damage. Use the weapon's crit if you crit. Pretty cool all around. If you can take a full attack, your best bet is to make all of your full attack actions and then use your offhand spell cast as part of spell combat to cast Shocking Grasp or whatever and get another attack that way. So it's kind of like you're attacking almost as regularly as the fighter, except you rely on a one-handed fighting style for the most part. You can, based on some lenient interpretations of the rules, you might be able to two-hand, but that's up to your GM, not to me. Now, as for archetype stacking, archetypes essentially replace abilities you already get. So as long as multiple archetypes don't try to replace the same thing, you can take them. It's kind of like if you imagine a class as a set of Legos. You can swap those Legos around and put new ones of the same size in those places. Your overall set might change color a little bit, but it still fits. But if you're a paladin, you can't trade Aura of Courage with one archetype and then trade it again with another archetype, it doesn't work. So when you're looking for archetypes, make sure that you are picking archetypes that don't overlap their abilities. Generally speaking, any archetype that modifies or replaces an ability doesn't stack with another archetype that modifies or replaces. And you got to be careful of those types of wordings, because some abilities will say this modifies but generally works the same as Spell Strike. For example, there's a Magus archetype, I think, I can't remember how to pronounce it, but it just Spell Strike with ranged weapons. So that doesn't stack with anything that modifies Spell Strike. Yeah, so in the article that I posted with the Skeletor one, none of those abilities overlap, so you can be a staff Magus who also casts hexes, which is pretty cool for Skeletor.
If you are curious if your archetypes do stack, you can go to the PFSRD, and what they've done, they've put together this really handy chart. So click on any of the base class, so whatever base class you're curious about, and if you go to their contents table, the very bottom one will always be archetypes and alternate class features. Click on that, and they've charted out every single class feature that that class has, and then below it they have all of the archetypes divided by Paizo published archetypes, Paizo published racial archetypes, and then third-party archetypes for that class. And as you go along, you'll see either a C or an X, and a C means that they've changed that one. So for example, the Blade-bound Magus has changed how his arcane pool works, and he has an X because he gives up Magus Arcana that he would gain at 3rd level. So that's what you're giving up to play the Blade-bound, which means that any other archetype that changes or replaces Arcane Pool, or changes or replaces the Magus Arcana at 3rd level, does not stack with the Blade-bound archetype. But otherwise, if you've got another archetype, for example, the Kensei, does not affect the Arcane Pool, does not affect that particular Magus Arcana, you could be a Blade-bound Kensei Magus.
Really, the Blade-bound one, think of it less as a archetype, which it is, of a traditional sense, and more of you chose a really special familiar, because in almost all ways the blade acts as a familiar.
Mm-hmm. Very super special, magical talking blade familiar that you can stab people with. All around cool.
I'll keep my lightning bunny anytime.
And our last no question for today comes from Earl Gendreau. He asks, could you go over the spell resistance mechanics? Param, why don't you cover this one?
Okay. Spell resistance is a special ability that some monsters and players can get through magic items or racial abilities. There's some ways dwarves can get it, a lot of monsters get it. Drow have a whole lot of it. And a lot of magic items will give it to you. But usually this is something you start facing at higher level. And what it is a base immunity to magic. That's not 100% reliable, but you can just ignore magic a lot of the time, or some of the time. And how it works is you have a spell resistance number. Usually it's pretty low, but it can get up there into the teens, and even higher for some of the stronger critters. And anytime, let's say that a creature has spell resistance 14. So anytime that anybody tries to cast a spell on that monster, that has, and the spells will specifically say if spell resistance applies to this spell, because some spells just ignore spell resistance. A lot of the conjuring school ignores it. But for the majority of the spells, you have to, in order to get that spell to successfully affect that creature, you have to roll what's called a caster level check, where you roll a d20 die, add your caster level to it, and if it beats the number, then the spell succeeds and has its effect. And if it doesn't beat the number, then, or match the number, you can tie it, then the spell does not affect that creature. Now there is only one wiggle room issue here, and that is with area effect spells. With area effect spells, such as if you throw a fireball on a room with a bunch of drow that have spell resistance, the spell resistance is on an individual basis. So while one of the drow might ignore the spell entirely because you couldn't beat its spell resistance, the others could very well still get nuked by the fireball. It's individual creature. You would check each of them one at a time.
All right. We've covered a lot of ground. This lightning round still made a longer episode, but not as long as it could have been. We'll be right back to wrap things up right after this. All right. So I've moved quite a lot of stuff to the shoutouts, but hopefully we can cover this pretty quickly. In fact, maybe I'll save this one. I'll just put it at the bottom. Put it where it goes later. You guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Thank you for joining us for another episode of No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. Before we go, I want to shout out to a couple of things of note or bring a couple of things to the attention of Pathfinder enthusiasts. First of all, PaizoCon. The schedule has gone live. In fact, just a couple of hours ago, the schedule, the lottery voting has started. So if you're not familiar with how PaizoCon events work, everything is done in a lottery system where you rank your interest in the events that are listed from 0 to 4. 0 being you're not interested, 4 being you're quite interested. And then once they close this, which I believe will happen, it's open until Monday, June 9th. So that gives you over a week to vote and rank these different items that you want, some of which are still to be announced because they relate to the special guests, and we don't know, we as attendees of PaizoCon don't know who the special guests are yet, but we do know when all of the events will be taking place, how many people can attend these events, and what time and what days they are. So you go, you look at it, you say, yeah, I really like the idea of playing in a James Jacobs run game, that's a 4. And you scroll down, it's like, well, that one I'm less interested in, but it would still be kind of cool to play in Black Fang's dungeon with Jessica Price, so I'll call that one a 2 or a 1. There is no limit to your 4s, there's no limit to your 0s, there's no limit to any number at all. Once it's all closed, they will randomly assign everyone based on some algorithm that is based on their preference. So you can go check out all the events now if you're planning on attending PaizoCon or if you're on the fence. It's at paizo.com/paizocon/events. I'm also going to give a shout out to a product of mine that recently got released by Purple Duck Games. That would be Paths of Power player option, the Reaper. Reaper's a new base class that is it's a martial character who gains necromantic powers. So as it kills things, it collects their souls and uses fragments of their souls to fuel its other special attacks. I'm pretty happy with this one. This has been part of the long-delayed Paths of Power product that was supposed to be a single product, but is now being released piecemeal as affordable PDFs. So you can get the player's options, the Reaper from Purple Duck Games, for $1.99 as a PDF. Come on, that's worth it, right, guys? And then you could be the first to post a review for player's options, the Reaper at Paizo.com.
And finally, we want to give a very special shout out to the third-party publishers that we think really have shaped what Pathfinder has become through their efforts. To start off with, Kobold Press, who was previously known as the guys who made Kobold Quarterly, one of the best magazines available after Dungeons and Dragons, Dungeon and Dragon, unfortunately sunset, and they continue to produce incredibly high quality material with all their releases. Next is Rogue Genius Games. It was founded by Owen Casey Stevens, and they produce some of the best balanced rules material for the game. So you can find things like alternate classes, really cool alternate rules, spell point systems, neat races done there. Ryan, why don't you pick up with some of these?
Sure. Next up, we have Wright Publishing, which is Steve Russell's publishing company. It releases a lot of the 101 spells of the various levels, and the Faces of the Tarnished Sook, which is a PDF series of high complexity NPCs that we were really big fans of. And they have just tons of different series, and I believe they almost match up with Rogue's Genius's one book a week release schedule, or one product a week release schedule. We also have Dreamscarred Press, which we were talking about briefly earlier. This is your go-to for Pathfinder Psionics. They update the 3.5 rules, which were open rules for Psionics, with a very Pathfinder feel to them. And pretty much everyone agrees that if you want Pathfinder version of Psionics, they are the best place to go. Next up, we have our friends at John Brazier Enterprises, who produced the book that I was talking about earlier, the Book of the River Nations. And John Brazier Enterprises produces a lot of material that will plug into your campaign, into your adventure paths. And they also have a line of fiction books and various adventures and whatnot. They've even got a couple of things that were written by Ed Greenwood, who we talked about earlier. And speaking of publishing material that ties in your campaign setting or your adventure path, Legendary Games. We spoke with Jason Nelson. We spoke with Jason Nelson and Rachel Ventura a couple of weeks ago about what's new with Legendary Games. Legendary Games is written by a lot of the people that write the adventure paths, and they are writing material that ties into the adventure path. So new options for characters that are playing in those adventure paths, new side quests that complete the stories that may be missing from the adventure paths due to editing or space constraints or afterthought. New subsystems or expansions of subsystems that are associated with the different adventure paths. Param, what are the last couple of things we've got on our list here for third-party publishers?
Okay. Finally, we have Frog God Games, which previously I mentioned they published my favorite third-party book, the Tomb of Horrors books. They also published Rappin' Athuk, which is a massive adventure, also similarly provided in a gigantic hardback. They also do the publishing now for Razor Coast and several other well-made products. They produce fewer products than a lot of the other third parties, but they usually put a lot of love and detail into their products that you don't see everywhere. And I'm actually not very familiar with the next one. Can you grab that one?
Oh, and Purple Duck Games, they are the inheritor of the Four Winds Fantasy Gaming license. Well, they're not inheritors, they bought it. Four Winds Fantasy Gaming was one of the first third-party publishers and may be the first print third-party publisher of Pathfinder material, Pathfinder-compatible material. Purple Duck Games picked up that imprint, and they are releasing books like the Paths of Power, which I had just mentioned earlier. And then finally, I want to shout out to the Everyman himself. Thank you for joining us, Alex. Why don't you tell people where they can find out more about you and the products that you've worked on?
All right. Well, I'm going to pull up my URL so I don't get it wrong because I'm not used to saying it. I'm most known for the Pact Magic Unbound series, which is through Radiance House. It is a supplemental addition to the Pathfinder role-playing game that updates Pact Magic from the Tome of Magic in 3.5 to a Pathfinder compatibility station. We update and expand upon it greatly. Our second volume of that book came out last November, and I am busily working on the next one. I have also done a lot of work for Raging Swamp Press, where I do a lot of campaign setting stuff, like I'll do a couple villages here or there. I have a new line that's coming out that I'm going to give a shout out to called Alternate Dungeons, where if you want to do an adventure that isn't in a sewer, I give you some tips and tricks how to take settings like forests or mines or other natural locations and tweak your way of thinking about them so that instead of thinking of it as a sprawling forest that the players can go anywhere in, how to kind of build that in the same way you would think of a dungeon. I worked on a product with Abandoned Arts called Amazing Races Kitsune. Anyone who follows my blog knows that that's my favorite race in the game because I think that shape-shifting makes for a really fun racial role-playing tool. And if you want to check out my blog, Everyman Gaming, right now it's on gamingeveryman.wordpress.com, but that might not be its address for too much longer, huh, Ryan?
That's right. We are planning on moving the Everyman Gaming blog over to the new Private Sanctuary home, which I believe will be nodirectionpodcast.com. We're still finalizing the new URL, but one of the big features of the site relaunch, which we are scheduled to have done by PaizoCon, which will be the July 4th weekend, one of the new features will be the Everyman blog, adding to our blog content, which so far has been sporadic and inconsistent. So on top of being very crunchy, you're going to add a lot of consistency to our blog material, Alex, that I personally am looking forward to.
Woo! I have stuff all lined up. It's pretty great. Right now, to give a little spoiler, sometime in June, I'm doing an article on the fighter versatility. One thing that I've seen a lot of is people worrying that the Slayer is going to replace the fighter. So I'm working on the math right now to see whether or not that's actually going to happen. So you have to look forward to that.
Awesome. And you'll be joining me for the next Crunch episode of the Private Sanctuary. Will be coming out in June as well.
Nice. June's going to be a great month then, at least for me.
Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello Jr. Yeah.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction. All right.
Thank you
for joining us,
guys.
everyone that was listening live. Sorry, I'm dozing off here, so we're going to have to call it no post-show this time.
Nope.
No.
Thanks. If you guys have any comments or questions, you know how to reach us. I gave that spiel earlier. We definitely want to hear them. And thank you all for enjoying the show. We'll see you around.